Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I was in Baton Rouge for a 3-day work conference last fall. I'm a marketing consultant, and my company had booked me into a modest but clean hotel just off the interstate. Nothing fancy, but it had a continental breakfast and decent reviews. I flew in late on a Thursday and didn't have time for much except ordering room service and setting an early alarm. I remember feeling weirdly tired that night, like jet lag had hit harder than usual, even though it was just a 2-hour flight. I double-checked the deadbolt before getting into bed, something I always do when I travel alone, but didn't think much of it. It was just another work trip. Same rental car, same PowerPoint, same corporate pleasantries. It was a little after midnight when I heard the banging. Not knocking, banging like someone was throwing their whole weight against the door. At first I thought it was the room next to mine, but when I sat up and listened, it was clearly coming from my door. I froze. It was that instinctual fear, like something primal in my chest just lit up. A woman's voice followed, fast and panicked. "Please, please, open up! He's gonna kill me!" I hesitated. Everything in me said not to move, but the way she said it, raw, breathless, like she was really running from someone, it cut right through the fear. I cracked the door with the latch still on, and there she was, barefoot, hair matted with sweat, makeup smeared down one side of her face. She couldn't have been older than 30. "Please, just let me in. My ex found me, he's here. I saw him watching my window." She kept glancing behind her like she expected someone to lunge out of the darkness. I didn't think. I just undid the latch and let her rush inside. She immediately locked the door behind her and pressed her back against it, catching her breath like she'd just sprinted a mile. I asked her if she'd called the cops, and she shook her head. No signal. I tried. "Can I just stay here for a little while? Just until morning?" I didn't sleep after that. She introduced herself as Jenna. She said she had checked into the same hotel earlier that day after leaving her apartment 2 towns over, claiming her ex-boyfriend had been harassing her for weeks. Her hands trembled as she talked, and I noticed a cut on her forearm she said came from trying to climb out of her bathroom window. I offered her a bottle of water and asked again if she wanted me to call the police, but she said no. Too risky, she told me. If he knows I talked to the cops, he'll do something worse. It didn't sit right with me, but she looked so scared that I didn't push it. I just figured I'd stay up and make sure she was okay. Looking back now, I should have listened to my gut. Around 3 a.m., Jenna finally dozed off sitting up in the armchair by the window. I stayed in bed half awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind kept circling the same thoughts. Why hadn't she gone to the front desk? Why didn't she have a phone? Something about her story wasn't adding up, but I kept telling myself I was just being paranoid. Maybe I'd watched too many crime documentaries. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had let a stranger into my space without really thinking it through. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, turned it to silent, and texted my sister just in case, something like, "Hey, random, but there's a girl hiding in my room. I'll call you tomorrow." Just in case. Around 5 a.m., I finally drifted off for what felt like 20 minutes. When I opened my eyes again, the chair was empty. I sat up instantly. My first thought was maybe she had left, but then I heard the shower running. The bathroom door was shut, and faint music was coming from inside. That's when I noticed something else. Her purse was sitting on the floor near the chair, slightly open. I don't know what got into me, but something told me to look. I crouched down and gently tilted it just enough to peek inside. Right on top of her wallet and keys was a small kitchen knife. No sheath, no cover. Just loose in the bag, blade pointed toward the bottom like it had been tossed in. My chest tightened, and everything in me screamed that this had gone from weird to dangerous. I stepped back quietly and sat on the edge of the bed trying to figure out what to do. I didn't want to overreact, but I also didn't want to end up on the morning news. I thought about grabbing my things and leaving while she was still in the bathroom. But what if she heard me? What if she came out? The shower turned off. I barely had time to sit up straight and pretend I hadn't seen anything before the door opened. Jenna came out, her hair damp, wrapped in a towel like this was just some normal sleepover. She looked at me and smiled. "Thanks for letting me crash. I feel 1,000,000 times better now." I didn't respond right away. I forced a small smile and nodded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Glad you're okay." She sat back down in the chair like nothing was wrong. That's when she looked at me, really looked at me and said, "You didn't call anyone, right?" Her tone was soft, but her eyes were sharp now. Cold, like all that panic from earlier had burned off and left something else behind. I lied. I told her I hadn't. She stared for another second, then nodded and leaned back in the chair. "Good. I just need to get out of here today. I can't stay in this state. You have a car, right?" That was the moment it shifted from uncomfortable to terrifying. I didn't answer her right away. My throat felt dry, and I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. She kept going like it was already decided. "We'll leave after breakfast. You can drop me somewhere quiet just over the border. No one will be looking for me there." She was talking with this eerie calm now, like we'd been friends for years, like I'd already agreed. I kept nodding, pretending to be on board, but inside I was panicking. I had no idea what she was running from or if she had done something much worse than she claimed. And the knife. I couldn't stop thinking about the knife. I excused myself to go grab ice from the hallway, and the second I closed the door behind me, I walked straight to the elevator and pressed the button like my life depended on it. I didn't take the car. I left everything in the room, laptop, suitcase, even my charger, and walked barefoot across the lobby to the front desk. I told the night clerk that there was a woman in my room who wasn't supposed to be there, and that I was scared for my life. To his credit, he took one look at my face and called security. They walked me to the manager's office and told me to wait. I sat there for 20 minutes that felt like hours. Eventually, a police officer showed up. I gave my statement, every detail I could remember. They went up to the room 308, but Jenna was gone, just vanished. The door was unlocked, the chair still pushed back from the wall, and my suitcase half packed on the bed. But no sign of her, not even the knife. I filed a full report, and the officer said there had been no registered guest under that name. No one matching her description had checked in. I don't even know how she got a room key to begin with. The hotel said maybe she was squatting, maybe she knew someone on staff. But they never found her. I ended up flying home that afternoon. I couldn't sleep for days after. I kept replaying it all, how close I came to driving away with her, how easily she got me to trust her, how calm she became when she thought she had control. To this day, I still don't know who she really was or what she had done before knocking on my door. But I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't left that room when I did, if I had gone along with it. Sometimes I check news reports from the states nearby, looking for stories that sound even remotely familiar. I haven't found anything, just silence, and honestly, that scares me even more. I used to drive long-haul deliveries through the South, mostly between Texas and Georgia. I've had weird encounters before, shady gas stations, strange people asking for rides, but nothing that ever made me feel truly unsafe. This happened about 2 years ago, in Mississippi. I don't remember the exact highway, just that my GPS lost signal for a good 30 minutes, and I ended up turning onto a narrow back road that didn't even look paved in some parts. I figured I'd stop at the next place I saw to ask for directions or maybe grab a snack and use the restroom. I wasn't in any kind of rush. It was a slow delivery day, and I'd planned to rest overnight anyway. It was late afternoon when I saw a small sign that said Country Motel General Store. The building looked worn down, but not abandoned. Think wooden siding, dusty windows, a flickering open sign. The kind of place where the air smells like old wood and cigarettes as soon as you walk in. There was a man behind the counter, maybe in his 60s, with this leathery skin and a trucker cap. He didn't smile, just stared at me like he hadn't seen anyone in weeks. I asked if he had any rooms. And he nodded, said, "One left." Then he pointed to a door at the back and mumbled something about signing a guest book later. I was too tired to think much of it. I just wanted a break. After I dropped my stuff in the room, which was a total time capsule from the 80s, by the way, with stained curtains and a tube TV that barely worked, I went back into the store to grab some chips or something. That's when things started to feel weird. The guy was still behind the counter, but now he seemed more alert. He asked me if I wanted something real good, then said, "We keep the good stuff in the back freezer. Come take a look." I laughed politely and said I was just after something simple, but he insisted. Twice. "Better snacks in the freezer," he said, not smiling. "You'll like what we've got back there." His tone was off, too calm, like it was rehearsed or something. I started looking around more carefully. That's when I noticed a dark smudge on the floor behind the counter, like a reddish streak going from one end of the linoleum to a mat near the back. I couldn't tell if it was old grease or something worse. But the smell hit me next. Not strong, but faint. This sickly sweet rotting odor coming from behind a heavy steel door near the fridges. It didn't match anything else in that place. My stomach tightened. I mumbled something about needing to make a call and stepped outside, pretending to check my phone. That's when I decided I wasn't staying there another minute. I went straight back to my room, grabbed my duffel, and didn't even bother locking the door behind me. I remember feeling this sharp instinct, like something deep in my gut was telling me to get out now. I walked as fast as I could across the lot to my truck, trying not to look like I was panicking. But the second I got in and turned the key, I saw the guy come out of the store and just stand there. No wave, no question, no smile. He just watched me. And the worst part? He didn't seem surprised at all that I was leaving, like he knew it might happen. I didn't stop driving until I hit the next real town with a gas station and cell reception. I didn't even feel safe until there were actual lights around me and people I could see. I told myself I was being paranoid, that maybe the smell was just spoiled meat or something, and the guy was just a weirdo, not a threat. But I couldn't shake how wrong everything had felt. That quiet pressure to look in the freezer, the weird guest book I never signed, the blood-like stain behind the counter. None of it sat right. I slept in my truck that night in a well-lit lot. I wasn't about to check into another motel anytime soon. A couple days later, I was sitting at a diner outside of Jackson, scrolling local news while waiting on my food. That's when I saw a headline about a missing person. A young woman, college age, last seen driving through the area I had just come from. Her car had been found abandoned on the side of the road, not far from a place described as an old country motel with a general store attached. My blood ran cold. The article didn't mention anything else, just that police were asking anyone with information to come forward. I didn't want to get involved, but I couldn't stop thinking about that freezer, that smell, and how that guy had acted like me leaving early wasn't a surprise at all. I ended up calling the tip line and told them everything. The location, the smell, the stain, the guy's name if it was real. I saw Earl on a sticker near the register, and how he kept trying to get me into the back. They took my statement, but I never heard anything else from them. No follow-up, no confirmation. A week later, I tried to look the place up again, but it was gone from Google Maps. The satellite view still showed the building, but there was no listing, no phone number, nothing. Like it had never been there. I've gone through every possibility in my head, but none of it explains what I saw, or what I almost walked into. What really messes with me is how close I came to opening that door. If I had been a little more tired, a little less alert, I might have just gone along with it. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I had followed him to that freezer. Would I have ended up like that girl? Would I have even made it out? The whole thing keeps playing in my head at night sometimes, especially when I'm on dark roads alone. I'll never forget the way that man stared at me when I drove off. Not angry, not confused, just still, like he was already thinking about who'd come next. I haven't told many people about this. Some would probably say I imagined it or made it sound worse than it was, but I know what I saw. That smell wasn't just old meat. I've worked in food service before. I know the difference between something expired and something dead. And no one tries that hard to get you to look at snacks. No one. It was like he didn't care about selling me anything. He just wanted me back there. That's what still gets to me. After that trip, I changed routes. I don't drive through Mississippi anymore unless I absolutely have to. I don't trust country motels either. Not the small ones off the road where no one would hear you scream. People think those places are just old and dusty, maybe a little creepy, but I've learned that sometimes they're more than that. Sometimes they're places where things happen, and no one ever talks about it. No reviews online. No cops that call you back. Just a dot on the map that quietly disappears. To this day, I have no idea what was really behind that freezer door. I never found out what happened to the missing girl either. The news just stopped talking about it. But I know what I felt that day, and sometimes when I think too hard about it, I wonder if I ever really escaped, or if I was just lucky enough to get away before it was my turn. Either way, I'm done pretending it didn't happen. That place was real. That man was real. And I'm telling this now because someone else might find themselves standing in front of a door that smells wrong. Trust your gut. I did. And I think it saved my life. I was 17, a high school senior, and honestly, life back then revolved around two things: dance and my little group of friends. We were all part of a competitive dance team from a small town in Ohio, and that weekend we had traveled to Indianapolis for a regional competition. It was one of those cheap trips where the school budget barely covered gas and rooms at a rundown 2-star hotel. I remember being excited, not just for the competition, but for the freedom of spending the weekend away from our parents. We were packed 3 to a room, and I shared mine with Taylor and Mariah, my best friends since middle school. That first night, after a long rehearsal, we were goofing around in the room, playing music too loud and eating vending machine junk like it was gourmet. Our room was on the 2nd floor, near the far end of the hallway, with a dusty view of the back parking lot. Across from us, maybe 3 or 4 steps away, was another room that seemed empty at first. But around 7 p.m., as we were getting ready to head downstairs for dinner, I caught a glimpse of someone standing just inside that doorway. A man, mid-40s maybe, with greasy hair pulled into a loose ponytail and a faded red flannel. He didn't look at us directly at first, just stood there, 1 foot inside the room, the other barely on the threshold, like he couldn't decide whether to come out or not. When our door opened and the hallway light hit him, that's when he turned and looked straight at me. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't a curious glance or even a rude stare. It was like he was memorizing me. I didn't say anything to the girls at first because, honestly, I wasn't sure what I saw. Could have been some tired trucker or a janitor or just a random guest. But even when we came back up later after dinner, he was there again. Same position, same weird energy. This time he didn't retreat into the room when we walked past. He stayed in the doorway, eyes locked on our door until we closed it. That night we joked a little about it. Mariah made some crack about how we were finally interesting enough to have a stalker. But the vibe had shifted. We moved the little chain lock across and even shoved a chair under the knob before going to sleep. It was one of those things you do just to feel safe, even if you're not totally sure why you feel unsafe. I woke up to the sound of the door handle rattling, like someone was testing it slowly over and over again. It took me a second to realize it wasn't a dream. The room was completely dark except for the soft orange glow from the street lamp outside filtering through the curtains. I sat up slowly, heart pounding, trying not to make any noise. Taylor was snoring lightly, but Mariah had stirred too, blinking at me from the other bed. The handle jiggled again, then stopped. A few seconds later, there was a low thud, like someone was pushing their weight against the door, gently but deliberately. I held my breath. The chair under the knob creaked slightly but didn't move. We stayed frozen like that for what felt like 10 full minutes. No footsteps, no more rattling. Just that awful silence pressing in on us from all sides. I was clutching my phone under the blanket, not even thinking about calling anyone, just holding it like some kind of safety net. Eventually, I whispered to Mariah, asking if she heard it too. She nodded, eyes wide, and mouthed, "Don't open it." Taylor, by some miracle, kept sleeping. I don't know how. After a while, we convinced ourselves it had passed. Maybe it was someone drunk who got the wrong door. Still, I barely slept that night, jolting awake at every creak from the hallway. Morning came, and everything felt fake under the daylight. We joked about it while brushing our teeth like it had been some weird shared dream. But when I bent down to pick up my shoes near the door, I noticed something that made my stomach flip. The chain lock, it was unhooked. I was the last one to check it before bed, and I know for a fact I latched it. We all stood there staring at it like it had turned into some alien object. That's when Taylor, now finally paying attention, pointed out a small scrape on the inside edge of the door, right near the lock. It looked like someone had wedged something in there and tried to pop it open. We went down to the front desk and tried to explain what happened, but I could tell the girl behind the counter wasn't taking it seriously. She looked maybe 20, chewing gum and barely making eye contact. "You want me to call maintenance?" she asked, like we were complaining about a leaky faucet. I asked if there were cameras in the hallway, and she said she thought so, but only a manager could pull the footage. He wouldn't be in until noon. That day at the competition, none of us danced right. Our heads weren't in it. Every time I tried to focus, I saw that man's face behind my eyelids. That kind of stare doesn't just vanish, it clings to you. After the event wrapped, we went back to the hotel just to pack and get out. But before we left, I convinced Taylor to come with me to the front desk one last time. The manager was there now. Older guy named Dean, who actually seemed to care. We explained everything from the night before, and when I mentioned the hallway camera, his expression changed. He didn't say much, just asked our room number and typed something into the computer. A few minutes later, he took us into a back office and showed us silent footage from the camera across our hallway. And there he was, that same man in the red flannel. At least 4 separate times during the night, he left his room, walked right up to our door, and just stood there. He didn't knock, he didn't pace, he didn't try other doors. Just ours. He would stand completely still for a few minutes, sometimes placing his hand on the handle, then slowly turn and disappear back into his room. The footage didn't show him actually trying to get in, but we knew what we heard. When I asked the manager who he was, he hesitated, then pulled up the guest list. The name registered to that room didn't raise any red flags. Stephen K. Something generic. Dean told us he had checked out that morning just before we came down. Left early, no luggage, no checkout at the desk, just slipped away. What really got me was how fast everything was brushed under the rug after that. The hotel refunded us one night, gave us a sincere apology, and asked if we wanted to file a police report. But since nothing technically happened, no break-in, no physical contact, they said there wasn't much they could do. We went home the next day and tried to act like it hadn't changed us, but it had. Mariah started sleeping with her door locked even at home. Taylor quit staying in hotels altogether. And me? I couldn't stop replaying the look in that guy's eyes. That kind of stare that doesn't want to hurt you quickly. It wants to watch it happen slowly. About a week after we got back, I received a message on Instagram from a private account. No profile picture, no bio, just a single message. "You girls dance beautifully." I froze. It didn't say who it was, and when I clicked the account, it had already disappeared. I never told the others. I deleted the message and set everything to private. Even now, years later, I still can't prove it was him. But I know it was. I know because I've never felt watched the way I felt that night. And somehow, even from behind a screen, it was the exact same feeling. It's been 4 years. I'm in college now, living in a different city, and I haven't had any strange messages or run-ins since. Maybe he moved on. Maybe it was random. Maybe it was just one of those terrifying things that happen to people, and you never get an answer. Just a memory that flickers back when a hallway feels too quiet, or a door clicks a little too softly in the middle of the night. I never went back to Indianapolis, and I never stayed in a budget hotel again. Whatever he wanted that night, he didn't get it, and I think about that chair holding the door shut and wonder how different my life could have been if it hadn't. I'm not proud of this, but I feel like I need to share what happened. I was 23 at the time, living alone about 40 minutes outside of Richmond. I had just moved out of my parents' place a few months earlier, and between work and trying to keep up with bills, I was in that weird space between being responsible and still doing dumb stuff for the thrill. That's how I ended up messaging a girl on this app I'd been using. It wasn't Tinder. It was one of those sketchier ones people don't talk about openly. And yeah, it was obvious she wasn't looking for anything serious. I wasn't either. Her name on the app was Alyssa, and the photos showed this blonde girl, kind of shy-looking, supposedly 21. We messaged back and forth for a couple days, and she eventually gave me an address to meet her at a motel in Petersburg. It was one of those places right off the highway, red neon sign flickering, 2 floors, all the doors facing the parking lot, the kind of place where people don't ask questions. I got there around 9:30 at night. I parked near the room she gave me, room 206, second floor, close to the end. There were only 2 other cars in the lot, one beat-up pickup and some old Honda with tinted windows. I sent her a message saying I was outside, and she replied instantly, "Doors open, come in." I remember hesitating for a second because that felt weird. No, I'll be right there. Just come in. But I shook it off. Dumb move. When I opened the door, the room was dark except for the bathroom light spilling into the main area. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, but immediately I knew something was off. It wasn't the girl in the pictures. Not even close. Her hair was darker, maybe dyed. She looked older, probably late 20s, with this really blank expression like she'd been waiting there too long or just wasn't all there. She barely looked at me when I said, "Hey, Alyssa?" She just kind of nodded but didn't get up or say anything else. I stood there for a second awkwardly, and then I heard the sound of the door clicking shut behind me. I turned around, and the guy from the Honda, I recognized the jacket from outside, was standing in front of the door. He didn't say a word. That's when I felt it, this sharp drop in my gut, like my body realized before my brain did that something was really wrong. I pulled out my phone immediately, instinctively trying to call someone, but the screen just froze. No bars, no signal, nothing. I turned the phone off and on again, nothing changed. Meanwhile, the woman just kept staring straight ahead like none of this was happening, and the guy by the door was just there, not moving, not saying anything. I asked what was going on, tried to keep my voice calm, and she finally muttered, "It's fine, you're fine." But she didn't sound convincing. My skin was cold, and my heartbeat was so loud in my ears it made everything else feel muffled. I wasn't even sure if I should run or sit or scream. I just knew I had to get out of that room. I started backing up toward the window, which was half covered by a curtain. The guy didn't move, but I noticed he shifted his weight like he was ready to block me if I tried to bolt. That's when I realized the door was locked from the inside with that deadbolt chain, and he was standing right in front of it. I tried to play it off, said I left something in my car and needed to grab it real quick. The woman didn't even react. The guy just stared at me, and I swear, the silence in that room felt like it was squeezing the air out of me. I walked over to the window like I was just checking something outside, but what I saw almost made me drop my phone. There was someone crouched down next to my car. They weren't even trying to be subtle. They had the driver's side door cracked open, and their head popped up when I looked. That's when panic really set in. I couldn't even tell if it was a man or woman out there, but whoever it was had gloves on and something metallic in their hand. Maybe a tool or something. My mind was racing. Were they trying to disable my car, plant something, steal it? I didn't know, I just knew I had to move. I turned away from the window and said, louder this time, "I'm serious. I left my wallet in the car." The guy stepped forward. Just one step, but it was enough. I didn't wait for anything else. I ran straight toward the bathroom, slammed the door shut, locked it, and flipped the window open. It was one of those tiny ones, the kind you'd never expect someone to fit through, but I didn't care. I squeezed through it like my life depended on it. I landed hard in the alley behind the building. My arm scraped against the brick wall, and my phone fell out of my pocket onto the pavement. I grabbed it and sprinted around the side of the motel, praying whoever was by my car hadn't seen me yet. When I reached the lot, the Honda was gone, just vanished. My car door was wide open, and the glove compartment had been rummaged through. I didn't even check what they took. I jumped in, started the engine, and floored it out of there. I didn't stop until I was back on the main road, with actual lights and people around me. The signal came back as soon as I was a mile away. That alone made my stomach turn. Like they were doing something to jam it. I pulled into a gas station and just sat there with the engine running, trying to process what the hell had just happened. I checked my phone, but the messages with Alyssa were gone, completely wiped. The app still showed our chat, but everything from that night was erased. Her profile was gone too. No trace of the room number, no screenshots, nothing. I didn't even know how to report it because I technically hadn't been robbed, not really. I kept thinking about the way she looked at me, not scared, not guilty, just empty, like she'd done this before, or worse, like she wasn't really involved, just bait. I didn't sleep that night. I kept imagining someone still had my info. That maybe I'd see that Honda parked outside my building the next day. For the next couple of weeks, I was paranoid as hell. I parked a few blocks away from my apartment just to see if anyone was tailing me. I checked my car every morning and every night. I even covered the peephole in my front door and slept with a knife under my pillow. No one ever showed up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, unfinished. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. Not friends, not family. Partly because I was embarrassed, but also because I didn't want to deal with the lecture. I kept going over it in my head, trying to figure out if I missed something, if I was targeted or just unlucky. I started reading about phone jammers and tracking devices, and the more I read, the worse I felt. It wasn't just some creepy setup. It was organized. One day, out of sheer impulse, I drove back to that motel in Petersburg. I told myself I was just curious, that I wanted to see if the place even still existed, like maybe the whole thing had been in my head. But it was still there. Same flickering sign. Same layout. Room 206 was open, being cleaned by an older woman in a housekeeping uniform. I asked her if she remembered a guest in that room from 2 weeks ago, and she looked confused. Said the room hadn't been booked in a month, that it had been out of service for repairs until just 2 days ago. I thanked her and left. I don't know if she was lying or just didn't want to get involved, but that moment made everything spiral again. If the room wasn't supposed to be rented, who gave me the number? Who had the key? What still gets me is how smooth it all was. The app account, the timing, the way the guy locked the door like it was muscle memory, the other person outside going through my car while everything was happening inside. It wasn't random. I think they've done this before. Maybe they do it a lot. Maybe someone didn't get out like I did. I still think about that woman sometimes. Her face, her expression. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't scared. She wasn't even pretending to be someone else. She was just there. Present, but not human in the way you'd expect. I've never seen eyes that empty before. I don't know what they were planning, and honestly, I don't want to know. Nothing's happened since then. No strange cars, no more messages, no knocks on my door. It was like it all disappeared the same way it started, out of nowhere. But I still can't explain how my phone signal was jammed or how they got into my car without setting off the alarm. Every now and then, I'll scroll through those apps just to see if Alyssa shows up again. She never does, but once, maybe 6 months later, I saw a profile that looked similar. Different name, different city, same kind of photos. I didn't click it. I deleted the app and haven't used anything like that since. Whatever that was, whoever they were, I think I got lucky, and I'm not looking to find out what happens when someone doesn't. I'm a 31-year-old nurse from Tennessee, and what happened to me last summer still creeps into my dreams some nights. It was the end of July, and I had just spent the weekend visiting my brother and his wife in Georgia. I had planned to drive straight home that Sunday evening, but halfway through the drive, I hit a wall of exhaustion. I was running on 4 hours of sleep and hadn't eaten since noon. My vision was getting blurry from the road lights, and I knew pushing through would be stupid. So I pulled off near an exit and booked a room at a small roadside motel. Nothing fancy, just one of those old 2-story places with faded paint and ice machines that sound like they're dying. I remember checking in just before 9 p.m. The front desk clerk was a woman in her 60s who barely looked up when I walked in. She handed me the key to room 108 and mumbled something about the soda machine being around the side of the building. The room itself was dated, yellow walls with peeling corners, a rattling air conditioner in the window, and a stiff floral bedspread that smelled faintly of bleach. But at that point, all I needed was a place to shower and sleep. I dropped my bag, kicked off my shoes, and lay down for a few minutes scrolling through my phone. That's when I realized how thirsty I was. It was around 10 p.m. when I stepped outside to get something from the soda machine. The parking lot was mostly empty, just a few scattered cars, including an old silver truck parked 2 spots down from mine. The motel lighting was dim, casting orange halos around each bulb, and the air felt heavy, like a storm was lingering just beyond the trees. I walked around the side of the building where the vending machines were, coin purse in hand, and that's when I heard a man's voice behind me, low and hurried. "Hey, excuse me, ma'am. Sorry, I'm locked out of my room. You wouldn't happen to know if the office is still open?" He was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, wore a denim jacket despite the heat, and had this unshaven, greasy look like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were jittery, not just tired, but like he was constantly scanning. I hesitated, not because of what he said, but because something about him instantly put me on edge. Still, I didn't want to be rude. I told him I had just checked in and hadn't seen anyone at the desk since then, but I could walk with him to see if the clerk was still around. He nodded, thanked me in a weirdly stiff way, and started walking beside me. Too close. I felt that internal alarm starting to buzz, but I brushed it off. I was just tired, I told myself. Just tired. As we turned the corner of the building, I realized how isolated that side of the lot felt. The soda and ice machines were humming, but other than that, it was dead silent. No traffic noise, no voices, nothing. That silence wrapped around us in a way that made my skin crawl. I started to say something like, "Maybe you should knock on the office door." But before I could even finish the sentence, I noticed he wasn't looking at the building anymore. He was staring straight at me. His whole posture changed. Shoulders tense, hands sliding into his jacket. That's when I saw the blade. Not some tiny pocket knife. This thing was long and serrated like something out of a hunting set. He said real quiet, "You weren't supposed to see anything." My brain couldn't even register what that meant. I stammered, "What? I didn't see anything, I swear." But he stepped forward and shoved me against the wall. The shock of hitting the brick took the wind out of me, and I felt this sharp burn on my left side. I looked down and realized he'd stabbed me. Not deep, but enough for blood to start soaking through my scrub top. I screamed loud and raw and tried to push him off, but he was stronger. He kept repeating that same phrase, "You weren't supposed to see anything," like he was possessed or trying to convince himself. Everything got blurry after that. I think my body went into some kind of survival autopilot. I remember grabbing the edge of the ice machine, trying to use it to swing myself away from him. He raised the knife again, and I honestly thought that was it. I was done. But right then I heard heavy footsteps running up behind us. A man's voice yelled something, "Hey, drop it!" And then there was this metallic clang and a cloud of white dust exploded between us. The guy with the knife stumbled back, coughing, while this other guy, tall, bald, maybe in his 50s, kept slamming a fire extinguisher into the attacker's arm until the knife clattered to the ground. I collapsed to the pavement. My side was on fire, and I could feel my hands shaking uncontrollably. The guy who saved me dropped the extinguisher and knelt beside me, checking if I was conscious, if I could move. I think I said my name. Or maybe just hospital. Everything was spinning. Another motel guest had come out and was calling 911. I remember seeing the guy who attacked me curled on the ground, coughing, covered in foam. He didn't look dangerous anymore. He looked pathetic. But even then, I couldn't shake the way he kept staring at me, like I had ruined something for him. The ambulance came fast. Faster than I expected for a place that felt like the middle of nowhere. I was taken to the nearest ER with a small puncture wound and a cracked rib from when I hit the wall. The doctor told me I was incredibly lucky the knife didn't go deeper. I barely remember the ride. I was shaking so badly they had to give me something to calm down. I don't think the physical pain even registered compared to the mental fog I was in. I kept replaying his words. You weren't supposed to see anything, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't seen him before, hadn't noticed anything weird earlier that day. But maybe I had seen something without realizing it. A license plate, a room door left open? I'll never know. The police came to take my statement while I was still on a hospital bed. They told me the guy's name was Kevin Bishop. He was a drifter with a long record. Assault, breaking and entering. Even a kidnapping charge back in 2015 that got thrown out for lack of evidence. He had checked into the motel under a fake name, no ID. They think he was staying there to lay low after some kind of robbery gone sideways. Apparently, earlier that day, another guest had reported hearing arguing in one of the rooms, and a woman crying, but when staff checked, nothing was there. Police later found blood in room 203. They never said whose. I stayed in town for 2 extra days to finish the police report and get stitched up, but the motel refunded my stay, like that would fix anything. I still get goosebumps when I think about how close I came to dying over a soda. The man who saved me, his name was Ronald. He was a trucker passing through, and if he hadn't walked out of his room when he did, I probably wouldn't be here writing this. I sent him a thank you letter a few weeks later, along with a photo of my little nieces. He didn't respond, but I hope he knows he changed someone's life that night. I don't stop at random motels anymore. I don't walk outside alone at night even just to grab a drink. People always say, trust your gut, and I didn't. I pushed that warning feeling down because I didn't want to seem rude or paranoid. Now I'd rather be rude than be dead. And to anyone reading this who works night shifts, who travels alone, or who thinks, it's just a quick stop, what could happen? Please, please be careful. I didn't see it coming, but I felt it, and next time I'll listen. I was in Cincinnati for work, just a short overnight trip to meet with a supplier the next morning. I checked into a business hotel near the airport around 7:30 p.m. Nothing fancy, just one of those mid-range chains with clean lobbies, beige carpets, and vending machines that never work right. I was on the 4th floor, room 417, and I remember being oddly aware of how quiet everything was. Barely saw anyone in the hallway when I got there. I ordered takeout, ate at the desk while watching something on Netflix, then got ready for bed. I was almost asleep when the room phone rang. It was weird because who even uses those phones anymore? I figured it was the front desk, and I was right. The guy on the other end said there was a billing issue with my card and asked if I could come down for a moment to sort it out. I was half asleep, but I didn't think much of it. These things happen, especially with corporate cards. I asked if it could wait until the morning, but he said they needed to fix it before the night audit. The voice sounded normal enough, not robotic or off in any way. Still groggy, I threw on some sweatpants and grabbed my keycard. The elevator ride felt longer than it should have been. When I got to the lobby, there was no one behind the counter. No bell, no signs, just the faint sound of some late-night show playing on a TV in the breakfast area. I waited for a minute, then leaned over the desk and called out a quiet, "Hello?" Eventually, a woman came out from the back office and looked surprised to see me. When I explained that someone from the front desk had called me about a billing problem, she frowned and said no one had made any calls. She was the only one on duty that night, and her log didn't show any issues with my room. That's when something in my stomach turned. It wasn't panic, not yet, but a kind of slow unease, like when your brain picks up on something before your body catches up. I mumbled something like, maybe it was a mistake, and headed back to the elevator, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was someone new at the front desk earlier, maybe a system glitch, whatever. But when I got back to my floor, I saw right away that my door wasn't fully closed. It was open maybe an inch, just gently swaying inward, and the chain lock, which I always put on by habit, was dangling broken off the latch. I froze, like fully stopped in my tracks, just staring at the door. My first thought was that maybe housekeeping had come in for some reason, but it didn't make sense. This was well past midnight, and I hadn't requested anything. I remember just standing there in the hallway for a few seconds, heart starting to pound, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But that chain lock being busted? That was the part I couldn't explain away. I knew I'd used it. I always use it, especially in hotels. And it wasn't just undone, it was snapped. The little metal hook was bent outward like someone forced it. I pushed the door open slowly, standing to the side in case someone was still in there. I don't know what I expected to see, but the lights were still off and everything looked almost the same. My suitcase was still near the desk, the bed looked mostly undisturbed, and the bathroom door was wide open. But I swear to God, the air felt different. Like that weird stillness after someone leaves a room, warm, like breath had just been there. I stood in the doorway holding my breath, listening. No movement, no voices, just the hum of the AC unit kicking on. I grabbed the closest thing I could use as a weapon, a lamp base that wasn't even heavy, and slowly walked through the room, turning on lights as I went. I checked the closet under the bed, even pulled the shower curtain back like I was in a horror movie. Nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. The chair at the desk was slightly pulled out. I hadn't left it that way. And one of the nightstand drawers was open a couple inches. I didn't even remember opening it at all. That drawer had the Bible and the little notepad, untouched. But it was like someone was looking for something. I wanted to call the front desk again, but my phone was still on the bed where I'd left it, and the room phone just gave me static. That's when the fear really hit me. I felt watched. Not like someone was in the room anymore, but like they had been. Like they were close, maybe still in the hallway, maybe even watching the door to see if I'd come back. I locked the deadbolt and jammed the busted chain as best as I could. I dragged the desk chair in front of the door and sat there with my back against the wall, holding the stupid lamp like it was going to help. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even blink. I waited until the sun started coming up before I even considered moving. I kept listening for footsteps in the hallway, doors opening, anything. But it was dead quiet all night. Around 6:30 a.m., I got dressed and went straight down to the front desk again. A different guy was there now, and when I told him what had happened, he just looked at me like I was confused or making it up. He checked the call logs. Nothing. Said no one on staff called my room, and no one else had reported anything strange on that floor. I asked if they had cameras in the hallway, and he said only in the lobby and elevators. I checked out early, didn't even stay for the free breakfast. I drove straight to a Starbucks a few miles away just to breathe. I remember sitting in the parking lot for almost an hour, trying to calm down, replaying everything in my head. I kept thinking, what if I hadn't gone downstairs? What if I'd ignored the call, or worse, what if I'd come back 5 minutes later than I did? There was no sign of forced entry, no stolen items, no real evidence that anything even happened. But I know what I saw. That door was open, that chain was broken, something was off. I talked to a friend later that day who works in hotel security, and he said sometimes people try to gain access to rooms by impersonating staff, calling guests to lure them out. He said it's rare, but it happens. That thought has haunted me ever since. Whoever it was, they knew I was alone. They knew which room I was in, and they timed it just right, like they were watching me. I kept thinking about how quiet that floor was, how I didn't see a single guest the whole night. It's like I was completely isolated, and someone knew that. It's been a couple years since it happened, and I still think about it every time I stay in a hotel. I double lock everything, prop a chair under the knob, even wedged the luggage rack against the door sometimes. I've never gotten another strange call like that, but I also haven't been able to shake the feeling that someone else was in that room with me that night, just for a few minutes. Long enough to move something, break the lock, and then vanish like it never happened. No one believes me when I tell it, but if you've ever had a moment where your gut tells you something was wrong and you can't prove it, you'll understand why this still messes with me. I'm not sure why I'm sharing this now, but I guess I'm still trying to process what happened. It was about 2 years ago, when I was 32 and going through a pretty rough patch. I had just left a long and toxic relationship, packed whatever I could fit into my car, and drove halfway across the state with my 2 girls, Alyssa, who was 9 at the time, and Lauren, who had just turned 6. We didn't have a place lined up yet, so I booked a cheap roadside motel just outside a small town called Marlow. I figured we'd stay for a few nights while I looked for an apartment and got the girls registered at their new school. It wasn't ideal, but it was all I could afford. The motel itself wasn't the worst I've seen. One of those one-story U-shaped buildings where you can park right outside your room. The sign flickered at night, and the lobby smelled like old coffee and bleach, but the room was clean enough. When I walked in to check us in, there was a man behind the desk who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Early 40s maybe, scruffy beard, grayish skin, and a weird twitch in his left eye that kept catching my attention. His name tag said Ed. I smiled, gave him my name, and he barely looked up from his screen. Then he glanced out the glass door at my car and saw the girls waiting inside. That's when his whole demeanor changed. He asked how old they were, with this crooked smile that immediately made me uncomfortable. I said something like, "They're just kids," and tried to move on quickly, but he kept going, said Alyssa looked mature for her age, and asked if we were staying long. I laughed awkwardly, didn't respond, just grabbed the room key and walked out fast. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe he was just socially weird. But I locked the room tight that night. It was a ground floor unit, close to the back corner of the property, with a big window facing the parking lot. I pushed the armchair up against the window just in case, even though it felt paranoid. The next day, I took the girls into town to check out the local library and see if we could find a grocery store. I didn't think anything was off until we came out of the library, and I saw someone standing across the street near a bus stop, just kind of watching us. He had on a baseball cap pulled low, but I swear I recognized that twitch. It was Ed. He wasn't pretending to wait for a bus. He wasn't on his phone. He was just standing there, staring. I quickly grabbed the girls' hands and walked to the car, telling myself again that it was just coincidence. But that night, I made sure to pull the curtains tight and left the bathroom light on while we slept. The second night was worse. Around 11:30 p.m., I heard what I thought was someone messing with the soda machine outside our room. I sat up in bed, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But then I heard the crunch of gravel, slow footsteps right outside our window. I didn't move. I just sat there, frozen, staring at the silhouette of the armchair pressed up against the curtains. The footsteps stopped. Then came this soft metallic rattle, like someone testing the handle of the window from the outside. My heart was racing so fast I thought I might pass out. I didn't want to scare the girls, so I whispered their names and told them to stay in bed while I called the front desk. No one answered. I tried 3 times, and each time it just rang and rang. I finally called 911. I couldn't see outside clearly because the curtains were too thick, but I stayed on the phone, whispering to the dispatcher and praying whoever was out there wouldn't try to force the window open. The cops showed up within maybe 10 minutes. By then, whoever it was had vanished. The officer who came to the door was kind, but he looked skeptical. He walked the perimeter, didn't find anything suspicious, and said it was probably just a passerby or someone from town cutting through the lot. I tried to press him about the man at the front desk, but he just nodded and said he'd make a note of it. The next morning, I went to the lobby to ask for a different room, something closer to the center, maybe near the office. But Ed wasn't there. There was a different woman, maybe in her 60s, who said she was the manager and that Ed only covered the night shift. I asked if there had been any complaints about him, and she immediately got defensive, said Ed was a good guy and that he'd been working there for years. When I mentioned the police being called, she looked surprised, said no one told her anything. I didn't push it further. I just asked for a different room and made up a story about needing easier access for my kids. That afternoon, we went out again, mostly just to kill time and stay out of the motel for as long as we could. I took the girls to a local diner for milkshakes, and when I went to pay, I swear I saw Ed's reflection in the glass behind the register. He was sitting in a car across the street, not even trying to hide it this time. Just parked there, engine running, looking right at us. That was the moment I stopped trying to rationalize anything. Something was seriously wrong. This wasn't awkward behavior or coincidence anymore. It felt like we were being hunted. I didn't know what he wanted, but I knew it had something to do with my daughters. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the armchair by the window, a kitchen knife from my bag on my lap, and just waited. The girls were both asleep, curled up in the same bed, totally unaware of how serious things had gotten. Around 2 a.m., I heard the gravel crunch again. My stomach dropped. I turned off the bathroom light and held my breath. Then came the soft, deliberate sound of the window being lifted. Slow, like whoever was doing it was trying not to make a sound. But I had locked it and shoved the chair back in place. The curtains moved slightly from the pressure. I stood up, heart pounding, and shouted, "Get the hell away from here!" loud enough to wake the girls. They both sat up crying as I rushed to turn on every light in the room. I grabbed my phone and called the police again. This time, they took it a lot more seriously. When the officers arrived, they actually caught him, Ed, behind the building near the dumpster. He had gloves on and a crowbar in his backpack. He claimed he was taking out the trash, but the cops weren't buying it. They asked to see the security footage from the motel's cameras, and that's when things got even creepier. The cameras facing the back of the building had been manually disconnected. I packed our stuff before the sun came up. The manager was mortified when she found out what happened, but I didn't want her apologies. I just wanted out. Ed was arrested, though I never found out what came of it. I refused to testify. I didn't want him knowing my full name or anything else that could be traced. We ended up staying at a friend's house in the next town over for a few weeks until I could find a proper place. I enrolled the girls in school quietly, used a P.O. box for everything, and kept a bat under my bed for months after that. To this day, I don't know what his real intentions were. Maybe he was just a creep who fixated on my daughters, or maybe it could have been worse if I hadn't been so paranoid. Either way, I trust my gut now, completely. If something feels off, it probably is. People like Ed don't usually look like monsters. Sometimes they just wear a name tag and smile too wide behind a motel desk. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I'm not the kind of person who usually shares stuff online, but this has been eating at me for over a year now, and I feel like I need to say something. Somewhere. Anywhere. My name's Eli Turner. I was 16 when it happened, living in Bridgeport, Oregon. It's a small, quiet place tucked between the coast and the woods, where nothing ever really happens except for our annual town fair. That year, it was on the first weekend of August, and like every summer, the fair rolled in with its rusted rides, overpriced cotton candy, and that weird mix of excitement and decay. I went with 3 friends, Jordan, Casey, and Lena. We weren't exactly a tight group, more like the kind of friends you drift toward because of proximity and boredom. We'd been wandering around the fairgrounds all afternoon, stuffing our faces, trying to win rigged games, making fun of the creepy clown cutouts near the funhouse. Just after sunset, we spotted this vintage-looking photo booth wedged between two food stalls. The outside was all chipped red paint and brass trim, with faded lettering that said "Memories in a Flash." It looked like something straight out of the 60s, the kind of thing you'd expect to find in a forgotten corner of a museum, not at a modern fair. Naturally, we couldn't resist. We all piled in, tight fit, smelled like dust and plastic, and took the usual set of stupid pictures. Tongues out, peace signs, all that stuff. When the strip printed out, though, something felt off. The first 3 frames were exactly what we expected. Us being idiots grinning and squishing together under the crappy booth light. But then there was a 4th photo. We all blinked at it for a second, confused. In it, we were still in the booth, same clothes, same angle, but none of us remembered taking that one. Our expressions were different. We looked stiff, almost posed, and behind us, partially hidden in the shadowy corner of the booth, there was a figure, a man. He was tall, with slicked back hair and this blank, distant look on his face. His eyes weren't even aimed at the camera, just slightly to the left, like he was watching something, or someone, outside the frame. At first, we thought it was a glitch or some kind of prank. Maybe someone photoshopped it as a joke, or the booth was rigged for scares like one of those horror attractions. But it didn't feel like a joke. Lena got quiet fast. She kept staring at the stranger's face and muttered that he looked familiar, though she couldn't place from where. Jordan tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. I felt this weird pressure in my chest, like the air had suddenly gotten thicker. We looked around, tried to find the guy in the crowd, but no one even remotely matched his look. And the vendor? He was this older guy with a gray beard and mirrored sunglasses, sitting behind the booth's control box. When we showed him the photo, he shrugged and said it wasn't possible. This model only prints 3 frames, he told us. Always has. We left the fair not long after that. Everyone was acting weird, quiet, distracted. I remember the photo strip crumpled in Casey's pocket, the edges damp from her sweaty hands. On the walk home, nobody really talked about it. We just split off one by one like we were trying to pretend nothing happened. But later that night, I got a text from Jordan. It was just a photo of the strip again, zoomed in on the 4th frame. "Look at his hand," he wrote. And when I did, man, I felt my stomach turn. The guy's hand wasn't resting naturally like someone squeezing into a frame. It was reaching toward Lena's shoulder, barely an inch away, fingers stiff and angled weird, like they were about to grab her but froze mid-motion. That was the moment it stopped feeling like a dumb fair gag, and more like something we weren't supposed to see. The next morning, Lena didn't show up to school. No texts, no posts, nothing. Her mom thought she'd stayed at Casey's house. Casey thought she'd gone home early. Jordan and I tried not to panic, but by lunch, teachers were already whispering. An officer came into class to talk to the principal. By the time school ended, the police were at the fairgrounds talking to vendors. That's when Casey told them about the photo. She brought it in the next day, creases all over it, but still clear enough to see that 4th frame. The cop who took it seemed skeptical until he asked where the original strip was printed. Casey pointed to the same booth, but when they checked it, something was off. The vendor, his name was Jerry or Gerald or something like that, acted like he'd never seen us before. Said a lot of people used the booth, couldn't remember every kid. But when the cop asked about the 4th frame, he got real defensive. "That machine's been in my family since '72, he said. "It's mechanical, analog. There is no 4th frame." He even opened the back to show the roll. Sure enough, it was a classic 3-frame print setup. Nothing fancy, no digital insert, no extra feed. I remember watching the officer's expression change, like he couldn't tell if we were playing a prank or if Jerry was hiding something. The whole thing had this weird energy, like everyone was suddenly aware something didn't add up, but no one knew what to do about it. By the weekend, the booth was gone. Just gone. That whole row of vendors was still there. Funnel cakes, corn dogs, cheap sunglasses. But the spot where the booth had been was empty. No tire tracks, no tarp, nothing. Jordan and I came back Saturday afternoon just to see it again, but it was like it had never been there. We asked around, but most people just shrugged or gave us blank stares. One guy even said, "Photo booth? Haven't seen one of those here in years." That didn't make sense. We'd used it less than a week ago. We even had the photo. But when we tried to show it to someone, the strip looked different. The last frame was darker now, almost overexposed. You could still see us, but the man's face was harder to make out, like it had blurred somehow or melted into the shadows. After Lena disappeared, things got bad fast. Her face was plastered all over the town, flyers taped to stop signs, school bulletin boards, even the fairgrounds fence. But no leads, no witnesses. No one had seen her leave, and her phone had gone dark that same night. Police kept circling back to us, asking about the last time we saw her, what she said, how she was acting. We told them everything, about the booth, the fourth photo, the man. But the more we insisted, the more they looked at us like we were making it all up. I could see it in their eyes, especially the detective Barlow, who kept pausing before he wrote anything down, like he was deciding whether or not it was worth the ink. A few days later, it happened again. Jordan went missing, just like that. I'd texted him the night before. He'd said he couldn't sleep, that he kept seeing the man's face every time he closed his eyes. Said he'd been dreaming about being in the booth but stuck inside it, like the door wouldn't open and the flash just kept going off, over and over. I tried to brush it off, tell him it was just stress or guilt or whatever, but when I didn't hear from him the next morning, I knew. I biked to his house. His mom said he left early for school, but he never showed up, just like Lena, gone without a trace. I brought the photo back to the police. This time, I noticed something that stopped me cold. In the fourth frame, Jordan looked different, not just posed, but scared. His eyes were wider than I remembered, like he saw something just before the flash went off, and where the stranger's hand had once hovered near Lena's shoulder, now it hovered near his. That's when I finally said it out loud to the cop. "I think it's taking us, one by one." The cop didn't respond right away. He just looked at the photo for a long time, then asked if I still had the original strip. I did. And when we compared it to the one I'd shown him just days earlier, it wasn't the same. The booth's fourth frame had changed again. This time, Jordan's face was blurred too. Casey was the last one left besides me. She wanted to get out of town, said we should go to her cousin's in Bend just for a while until things calmed down. But I couldn't leave. Something about it felt wrong, like if we ran, it would follow. Casey didn't wait. She left that night. I didn't hear from her again until 2 days later, when she called from a burner phone, whispering like she was hiding. "It's here," she kept saying. "I saw the booth. It's parked near a gas station. Same red paint, same lettering. But it wasn't plugged in. It wasn't even near power." Then the line cut. I tried calling back, but the number was dead. When I checked the frame again the next morning, Casey's smile was off. Crooked. Her body angled just slightly away from the rest of us. Like she was already starting to disappear too. After Casey vanished, I stopped sleeping properly. I kept the photo strip in a drawer, taped in an envelope, but it didn't matter. I knew it was there. I could feel it, like it was humming or watching. Every night I swore I heard the faint click of a shutter somewhere in my room, like a distant camera flash with no light. I started checking mirrors, windows, even my closet before bed. Nothing helped. The fear wasn't loud, it was quiet, persistent. Like something waiting in the corner of your eye, just outside focus. I started wondering if maybe it wasn't the booth doing this. Maybe it was the picture itself. A trap, a curse. Whatever it wasn't done. Eventually, I did what most scared teenagers do when nobody believes them. I went back. It was stupid, I know that now, but part of me thought that if I could see the booth again, maybe I could stop whatever was happening. So I went to the fairgrounds at night, alone just past midnight. There was no fair anymore, just an empty lot with trampled grass and scraps of trash caught in the wind. But the booth was there. Same spot. No lights, no vendor. Just sitting there in the dark like it had always been waiting for me. I don't know what I thought I was going to do. Burn it, smash it, bargain with it. But I stepped inside, closed the curtain, and sat. Nothing happened at first. Then I heard the click. The first frame printed, then the second. I didn't pose, I didn't smile, I just sat still, staring at the camera. On the third flash, I felt a chill crawl down my back, like someone exhaled behind me. I turned. No one. But when the fourth frame clicked, I saw the glare of the stranger's eyes reflected faintly in the booth's glass. I bolted out, grabbed the strip, and ran home without looking back. When I checked the photo, I was alone in the first three. But in the last one, I wasn't even in the picture. Just the booth, empty, and the man standing in the center staring straight at the camera. The next day, I went to the police one last time. I gave them everything, photo, story, all of it. I don't know what convinced them, maybe the desperation in my voice, or maybe someone higher up had started connecting the dots. Because that week they reopened a cold case from 1985. Same fairground, same booth. 3 missing teens, 1 blurry photo with a 4th frame no one could explain. They said the vendor back then disappeared too. No trace. I don't know what the booth is, if it's haunted, cursed, or something worse. But since that night, it hasn't come back. Not to our town anyway. I still have the photo. I keep it locked in a metal box in the back of my closet, wrapped in cloth. I haven't looked at it in over a year. Sometimes I hear the soft sound of paper sliding inside, like another frame being added when no one's watching. I try to ignore it. I've moved twice since then, changed my number, deleted every picture I ever took with friends. But deep down, I know I'm just waiting. Not if, but when. Because I was in that 4th frame once too, and whatever it is, it doesn't forget. Not sure if this belongs here, but I've been reading stories on this forum for years, and after what happened to me and my wife last spring, I figured it was time to share. My name's Josh, I'm 33, and my wife Emily is 29. We just bought our first home together in rural Ohio, a beat-up old duplex just outside a dying little town called Mercer Hollow. It was the kind of place where people waved from porches but never made eye contact. The kind of place with more for sale signs than neighbors. We bought the duplex off a foreclosure listing. It was dirt cheap. A fixer-upper, sure, but we thought we were getting a deal. Turns out we were getting way more than that. It was a 2-story structure, nothing fancy. Vinyl siding peeling off, faded blue shutters, and a half-collapsed shed out back that smelled like wet leaves and mouse piss. But we loved it. It had potential, you know? Hardwood floors under the grime, clawfoot tubs, wide porches. Emily had dreams of painting murals in the guest room. I just wanted a place to make coffee in the mornings without hearing upstairs neighbors stomping around. The place came with a full basement, which was a huge bonus for storage. There was a locked door down there when we first moved in, but we figured it led to plumbing access or some utility panel. We didn't think much of it at first. The previous owner had died. That much we knew. An old guy named Kenneth Doyle. No family, no obituary. Just one of those people who quietly disappears into the background of a town. The realtor didn't say much, just that the property had sat vacant for a bit. We found stacks of yellowed newspapers in the attic, all dated between 2006 and 2012, and a Polaroid of a young girl with the name Cassie written on the back in shaky handwriting. Creeped us out, but we figured it was just leftover junk. Part of the deal. We were so focused on the future, we didn't stop to question the past. It wasn't until our second week living there that we finally got the basement door open. I used a crowbar after I got tired of trying to find the right key. The door was solid wood, unusually heavy, with deep scratch marks around the frame, like someone had tried to pry it shut, not open. Behind it was a narrow hallway that looked nothing like the rest of the basement. The drywall gave way to concrete walls, painted black. At the end of the hall was a steel door with no handle on the outside, Just a keyhole and 5 bolts. It was completely out of place, like something out of a fallout shelter. I stared at it for a while before even trying to open it. I didn't tell Emily right away. Something about the door just felt off. That night, while she was upstairs brushing her teeth, I went back down with a flashlight and tried every key we had. None fit. Eventually, I used a drill to knock out the lock mechanism altogether. Probably stupid in hindsight, but I needed to know what was behind it. The second it popped open, a damp, metallic smell poured out. Not like mold, more like rust, sweat, and something sour. The air felt thicker inside. The room itself was about the size of a small bedroom. No windows, no light fixture. Just concrete walls, an old stained mattress in the corner, and a heavy-duty shelf bolted into the wall. That shelf is what messed me up. It had 5 glass jars sitting neatly in a row. Each one had a white label, handwritten in black marker. Lindsay, Tasha, Aaron, Mara, and Isabel. Inside each jar was something I couldn't immediately identify. One had what looked like a hair ribbon. Another had what I swear were baby teeth. Emily came downstairs halfway through me examining them, and I'll never forget the look on her face. It was like something inside her just turned cold. She didn't scream or cry. She just whispered, "This room isn't on the blueprint." We called the police that same night. I didn't want to, honestly. I felt like we were trespassing on something ancient and ugly that should have stayed buried. But Emily insisted. The deputy who showed up barely looked old enough to shave, but he called in backup the second he saw the jars. They taped off the basement, brought in a forensic team, and took everything. We had to stay in a motel for 3 days while they processed the scene. When they finally let us back in, one of the detectives, a woman named Riley, told us that one of the names matched a missing persons case from 2008. A girl named Mara Elliott, last seen walking home from school 2 towns over. She was 11. That's when everything exploded. News vans started parking across the street. Strangers knocked on our door asking if we saw ghosts or felt any evil energy. Someone even tried to sneak into the basement through the backyard window. We were suddenly the couple who lived in that house, the murder house. Or worse, the house of some sick collector, like the media started calling it. Emily stopped sleeping. She'd sit up at night scrolling through articles and missing persons databases trying to find patterns. I couldn't even step into the basement anymore without feeling like something was watching me from that 4th room. One night, about 2 weeks after the story hit the news, Emily woke me up around 2:30 in the morning. She said she heard footsteps in the basement. I told her it was probably the pipes or an animal, something rational. But when I went down there with a baseball bat, I found the steel door wide open again. I had locked it. I know I locked it. The latch was twisted open, like someone had undone it from the inside. The room was empty, but the mattress had been moved slightly, just enough to notice. And someone had placed a 6th jar on the shelf. No label, just a dried-up Band-Aid floating in what looked like cloudy water. I didn't tell Emily about that part. After that, we tried to sell the house, but no one would touch it, not even with the lowered price. The property had become infamous. Bloggers, ghost hunters, even a couple of true crime YouTubers tried to sneak onto our lawn for content. One guy from Indiana even offered to rent the place for a week just to do a ritual. Emily nearly threw her coffee at him. We felt trapped, not by the mortgage, but by this weird legacy we didn't ask for. The town stopped seeing us as neighbors and started seeing us as part of the mystery. People stared at the grocery store. Someone left a note in our mailbox that just said, "Should have stayed locked." Riley, the detective, stayed in touch for a while. She seemed genuinely disturbed by the case. She told us privately that they were testing the DNA from the jars, but that the results were inconclusive or contaminated. She said that the shelf had scratches underneath each jar's base, like they'd been moved a lot over time, carefully, repeatedly, like some kind of ritual or system. But the biggest thing she said that stuck with me? This room wasn't made to keep people out. It was built to keep someone in. That sentence still gives me chills. I think about it way too often, especially when I'm alone in the house. A month later, we made a decision. We boarded the steel door shut. We didn't talk about it. Just did it one Sunday morning with 2x4s, nails, and silence. We covered the hallway entrance with a new shelf and moved the washer and dryer to block the path. Emily said it was for our peace of mind, but I knew she didn't believe it would stop anything. Still, it helped. Things went quiet after that. No more jars, no more strange noises. Just us, in a house we no longer loved, trying to feel normal. But every now and then, when I'm in the kitchen, I swear I hear that steel door creak behind the drywall. Just once. Just enough to make me freeze. We eventually moved out. It took us 9 more months, but we found a buyer, some investor from out of state who planned to turn the duplex into rentals. We didn't say anything about the door. Legally, we disclosed what we had to. The rest, we left buried. Emily and I moved closer to her sister near Columbus. We don't really talk about Mercer Hollow anymore. It's like this silent agreement between us. She won't bring it up if I don't. But sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and she'll already be awake, staring at the ceiling. We both know what we're thinking. That room, that damn room. A few weeks ago, I got an email from a random Gmail account. No subject, no message. Just a single attachment, a photo. It was a picture of the shelf. Same room, same jars. Except now there were 8. 2 new ones. The names written on the labels, Josh and Emily. The picture was taken from the corner of the room, like someone had been standing inside. I tried to trace the IP address, but it bounced through so many proxies it led nowhere. I didn't tell Emily, I just deleted it and pretended it never came. But I kept a copy. I don't know why. Sometimes I wonder what Kenneth Doyle was doing down there all those years. Whether he was just some recluse with a sick obsession or something worse. Something that didn't start with him. Something he was trying to contain. Maybe the 4th room isn't a room at all. Maybe it's a doorway, or a trap, or something that just needs names. I don't know, and I don't want to know. All I know is that place changed us. Not just how we live, but how we think. About safety, about secrets, about the things that hide in plain sight right under your feet. If anyone reading this ever finds a locked room in a house that shouldn't exist, don't open it. Whatever's behind that door isn't meant for you. And once you see it, it sees you back. I used to drive the night route for the county transit out here in Caldwell, North Carolina. Not much to it. Mostly quiet roads, small towns, and the occasional late-shift nurse or drunk college kid heading back to Lenoir. My name's Dale McCready. Back in 2016, I'd been with the Transit Authority for almost 9 years. Divorced, no kids, just me and my border collie, Riggs. I took pride in knowing every back road, every stop sign, and every one of the regulars by name or at least by face. My life was uneventful in a way I used to find comforting. That is, until the night I dropped off my last passenger just before Hollow Creek, and something I still can't explain happened. It was a Thursday, late March. You know the kind of evening where the woods seem too quiet, and the air is still holding on to winter. I remember checking my mirror after pulling out of the last legit stop, an old grocery store off Route 90, and seeing only one passenger left. His name was Walter, an elderly guy with dementia who rode the bus sometimes just to get out of the nursing home. Usually a nurse was with him, but that night he was alone. He sat 2 rows behind me, mumbling something I couldn't catch. I figured he'd pressed the call button by accident when he rang for a stop on Hollow Creek Road. Nobody gets off there. That part of the road isn't even officially on the route anymore. It used to lead to some hunting cabins, but they've been empty for years. I slowed to a stop anyway, just in case. The woods were so dense there that the bus lights barely pierced past the first row of trees. Walter didn't move at first. Then he shuffled up the aisle real slow, like he was dragging something invisible with him. I glanced at him through the rearview mirror and asked if he was sure this was his stop. He didn't respond, just stepped off and turned toward the tree line. That's when he said it. Just as I was about to close the door, I swear I heard him mutter, "They came from the trees." It made my stomach clench for some reason. I didn't even know what the hell that meant, but it stuck with me. He disappeared into the woods, and I waited a minute or two, thinking maybe he'd realize it wasn't where he meant to get off. But the guy just vanished. I called it in to dispatch, let them know I was making a quick U-turn since Hollow Creek doesn't loop back to the main road. That's when the radio cut out. Total silence, not even static. It was like someone had unplugged the whole system. The bus dashboard started glitching, lights blinking, engine clicking even though it was still running. I hadn't seen another car for miles, and the road was pitch black behind me. When I looked in the side mirror, I noticed something that still haunts me. My taillights were glowing against something in the trees. Something tall. Something that wasn't there a second ago. I didn't get a clear look, but the shape was tall, narrow, and way too still to be a person. For a split second, I thought maybe it was a tree stump or just my eyes playing tricks. But then it shifted. Not like it walked. It tilted, like it was adjusting its weight almost fluidly, and then froze again. That was enough for me. I threw the bus into reverse, did a tight three-point turn, and floored it back toward the main road. But as I was turning, I swear, I heard something hit the side of the bus, not like an animal or a branch. It sounded like fingers dragging across the metal, long ones, slow, deliberate. I didn't stop. I drove for nearly 10 minutes without seeing another car. When the radio finally came back online, it crackled like someone was whispering on the other end, but no one responded when I called for dispatch. I kept my eyes glued to the road, but something didn't feel right. You ever get that sensation like you're being followed, even if there's no headlights behind you? That's what it felt like the whole way back to the garage. I kept checking my mirrors, and every time I did, I swore I saw movement along the edge of the trees, fast, low to the ground, darting between shadows. When I finally pulled into the depot, the lot was empty, which was weird. Usually Steve or Marcy was there to do the overnight checks. I parked the bus, grabbed my logbook, and went to the break room, but it was dead silent. The clocks were blinking like there'd been a power outage. I sat there for a minute trying to calm my nerves, wrote a note to report what happened with Walter, and then locked everything up and left. That was the last time I ever sat behind the wheel of that bus, because the next morning, they found it abandoned right back on that same stretch of Hollow Creek Road. Engine cold, door open, and me gone. Only problem is, I remember driving it all the way back. I remember locking the gate behind me at the depot, but the GPS showed the route ending near that drop-off spot. Same timestamp, same location. No footage from the onboard camera, no GPS log after 8:47 p.m. And here's the kicker. Walter was found sitting at a diner 20 miles away the next morning, barefoot and covered in pine needles. He was mumbling the same thing over and over to the waitress. They came from the trees. They came from the trees. His shoes were never found. The investigation went nowhere. The transit authority pulled the logs, called in local police, even brought in some guy from Raleigh to review the data systems. All they found were conflicting entries. One that showed the bus arriving at the depot, and another showing it powering down on Hollow Creek Road. No fingerprints except mine and Walter's. No tire tracks off-road. No sign of forced entry, struggle, nothing. I tried telling them what I remembered, about the radio, the figure in the woods, the dragging sound. But after a while, I could tell they didn't believe a word. I sounded crazy, and maybe I was starting to feel that way myself. But how do you explain remembering something that never officially happened? Walter was transferred to a different facility a few weeks later. He stopped talking entirely after that. They said he had a rapid cognitive decline, couldn't even feed himself. The last thing he ever said before they moved him out was to one of the nurses, "Tell the driver not to look in the mirror." That sent chills down my spine when I heard about it. Because I had looked, and maybe I shouldn't have. I ended up quitting the transit job not long after. Couldn't get back on a bus. Couldn't even stand driving past Hollow Creek, not even in broad daylight. The trees looked too still. Like they were watching. For the longest time, I didn't tell anyone what really happened. The official story became that I must have had a blackout, driven the bus back subconsciously, then somehow wandered back to where the incident started. No charges, no consequences, just confusion. But here's the thing. I have this recurring dream. I'm driving the same route, but the road never ends. The trees get taller the further I go, and the radio is always silent, except for a whisper that grows louder every time. Don't stop. And the worst part? I always look in the mirror at the end of the dream. I never see myself. I don't know what's out there near Hollow Creek. I don't care if it's some kind of hallucination, some forest phenomenon, or something worse. All I know is something happened out there. Something that made time stutter and reality fold in on itself. If you ever find yourself on a road with no streetlights, no cell signal, and nothing but tall trees around you, don't stop. And whatever you do, don't look in the mirror. I don't usually talk about this. It's one of those stories that makes people either look at you like you're crazy or try to explain it away with something that sounds comforting but doesn't make sense. My name's Mallory Grant. I was living in Nashville when it happened, working freelance gigs and trying to scrape enough together for rent. My older sister, Paige, had moved back to our hometown in West Virginia a few months earlier. We weren't talking every day, but we were close. Closer than most, especially after our mom died. She was the kind of sister who always knew when to check in. Then one day, she just didn't. It was late July, brutally hot. I remember because the AC in my car gave out on the drive back to Clifton. That drive was the start of everything. Clifton's a quiet town tucked between low mountains and half-forgotten roads, and the further you get from the highway, the more it starts to feel like the rest of the world gave up on it. I hadn't been back in almost 5 years. Nothing had really changed, but something felt different the second I crossed the town line. Not visibly, just in the way people looked at you from porches, the silence in places that used to be noisy, and the quarry. It was like even the trees leaned away from it. Paige had supposedly gone hiking alone the day she disappeared. No note, no text, just a voicemail I didn't hear until hours later. "Hey, I think I found something weird out here." Then static. That was it. The official report said it was a tragic accident. The terrain around Clifton Quarry is rough and unmaintained, and they said she probably slipped, drowned. But there was no body, just her phone, found cracked at the edge of the woods, and a single shoe. I remember holding it in the station like it would somehow explain things. The cops kept saying closure, like repeating it would make me feel it. I stayed in Clifton that week. I asked around. Friends, old teachers, even the guy who used to run the gas station. Every single one of them said the same thing. Paige shouldn't have been up there. No one would explain why. One woman, Mrs. Dorsey, she used to bake pies for church on Sundays. She looked like she wanted to say something more. I'll never forget how she held my hand and whispered, "Just let her rest now." Then she crossed herself and walked off like we were standing at a gravesite. But Paige didn't have a grave. She wasn't dead. I could feel that, like some thread between us hadn't snapped yet. I didn't go back to Nashville, I stayed. I rented a short-term room above the old post office. It smelled like dust and mothballs, but it was cheap, and I needed to be close. Every day I'd drive out to the edge of the woods near the quarry, park, and walk the same path they said Paige took. It wasn't marked anymore, overgrown in places like nature had been trying to erase it. I brought a flashlight, a journal, water, and the voicemail saved on my phone. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd hear something new if I listened to it out there. The static always came at the exact same spot on the trail. Always. A few days in, I found something. Not what I was looking for, not Paige, but something. It was a photo wedged into a crack in a boulder near the eastern ridge of the quarry. It had curled edges and sun-bleached faces, 4 people posing in front of the same cliff where they said my sister disappeared. I didn't recognize them, but on the back someone had scribbled a year, 1993, and below that, in faded ink, "Don't come back." I took it straight to the sheriff's office, thinking maybe it was connected somehow. He barely looked at it before sliding it into a drawer and muttering, "Old prank. Locals like to scare hikers." But there was something in his face, a flicker of recognition he tried to bury under indifference. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just kept thinking about the photo, about how it looked like it had been placed there recently, not just dropped decades ago. Around 3 a.m., I started rereading articles from the local archives. That's when I noticed something odd. Paige wasn't the first person to go missing near that quarry. There were others. I found 3 names from the same summer: Jack Redfield, Alyssa Lang, and Brent Waters. All hikers. All gone without a trace. Not a single one had a follow-up article. Just a mention in the police blotter and then nothing. Like the town had scrubbed them away. And when I brought it up the next day at the diner, the waitress froze for a second and then said, "People get lost in the woods all the time." But she couldn't look me in the eye. So I went back to the spot where I found the photo. I searched for hours. That part of the trail always felt colder, even on those 90-degree days. The air was heavier, like breathing through wet cloth. Just past the ridge, there was a strange formation carved into the rock, 3 intersecting circles with jagged lines running through them. It didn't look natural. I brushed away the dirt and saw other markings too. Words maybe, but they were worn down. I took pictures, even tried sketching it, and then I heard it. Footsteps behind me, soft but steady. I turned fast. No one. Nothing. But the feeling didn't go away. You know that prickling sense that someone's watching you? It was like that times 10. I left fast, almost twisted my ankle on the way down. The next morning I woke up to find my car had been keyed. Not just scratched, but carved into. Deep, angry slashes across the doors. And on the back window, someone had etched the same symbol I saw on the rock, those 3 intersecting circles. I reported it, of course, but the officer who came out barely pretended to take notes. When I mentioned the symbol, he stopped writing entirely. Just said, "Best not to stir things up, Miss Grant. People don't like outsiders poking around old wounds." I wanted to scream at him. I wasn't some outsider. My sister lived here. We grew up here. But in that moment, I realized something. They'd already decided she was gone. And I was next if I didn't back off. Still, I couldn't. I started knocking on doors again, this time with the names of the other missing hikers. Most people pretended not to know them, but a guy named Eli, he worked part-time at the local scrapyard, finally cracked. He said he remembered Jack Redfield, said he was dating a girl from town that summer, and they used to hang around the quarry at night. One day Jack just vanished and the girl's family moved away a week later. Town called it a bear attack, he told me. But everyone knew that was bullshit. There's something in those woods, Mallory. Something that doesn't want to be found. He wouldn't say more after that. Just kept looking over his shoulder like someone might be listening. The next day, I went one last time. I don't even know why. Maybe I thought I'd find a piece of Paige's necklace or hear her voice again. I brought a shovel, thinking I'd dig near the spot with the carvings. Instead, I found a hole already there. Not fresh, but recent enough that the dirt was loose and uneven. Inside was a small box wrapped in cloth. It held 3 things: a lock of blonde hair tied with red thread, a rusted compass, and another photo. This one had Paige in it. She was standing in front of the quarry looking off to the side, like someone had called her name at the last second. On the back, the same handwriting. She saw too much. That's when I ran. I didn't look back. I left Clifton the next morning, packed everything and drove straight through the night back to Nashville. I didn't tell anyone, didn't call the sheriff. I kept the photo though. It's in a locked drawer in my apartment and sometimes I take it out just to remind myself that it was real. Paige is still listed as missing. No remains, no new evidence. Just a sister who went out for a hike and never came back. And every once in a while I dream about those woods, about the quarry. I see her there, standing at the edge, facing the trees. I want to scream for her to turn around, but she never does. She just steps forward. And I wake up before she falls. I'm Sarah Whitman. I've lived in Pine Hollow, Alabama my whole life. It's one of those towns where everybody knows everybody, and the loudest thing on a weekday morning is the hum of lawnmowers or the clinking of coffee cups down at Ruby's Diner. I've been teaching 9th grade English at Pine Hollow High for the last 11 years. Nothing fancy, just literature, grammar, and the occasional pep talk to a kid who doesn't think he's smart enough. I rent a modest house 3 blocks from the school, I drive a '99 Toyota Corolla, and I have a cat named Milo who only likes me when he's hungry. That's the pace my life's always moved at. Slow, predictable, quiet. Or at least it was. The morning it started, everything felt normal. It was late March, still chilly enough to need a jacket before the sun fully came out. I got to school around 6:45 a.m. like I always do, coffee in hand, ready to prep for my first period. But something was off. The front office was strangely quiet. The secretary, Brenda, usually chirpy and borderline nosy, just looked pale and distracted. "Did you hear?" she asked me, barely above a whisper. "Mr. Barlow died last night." I blinked. "Wait, Ray? The janitor?" She nodded, eyes welling up. I didn't know what to say. Ray Barlow had worked at the school longer than I'd been alive. Quiet guy. Old. Always wore a green utility jumpsuit that looked 2 sizes too big. I used to joke that he'd been at the school since the brick was laid. I was shocked but not devastated. Ray had to be in his 70s, and the man smoked like it was still legal indoors. Brenda said it was a heart attack. Died in his little break room behind the gym sometime overnight. The principal found him that morning when he didn't clock in. They'd already called his next of kin and sent someone to clean out his things. It felt strange how fast everything was moving. Life goes on, I guess. I went about my day, taught my classes, collected essays on To Kill a Mockingbird, and sat through a faculty meeting that felt longer than the actual school day. But then something happened that I still can't explain. That afternoon, around 4 p.m., I was in the teacher's lounge grading papers when I saw a small cardboard box sitting on the table with a sticky note that said, "Barlow's stuff." Someone must have dumped his locker contents there for sorting. Curious, I started going through it. Most of it was junk. Old pens, keys, 2 crushed packs of Marlboros, a rusty thermos that smelled like soup, and a small, spiral-bound notebook with a black cover. The kind you get in bulk at Walmart for $1. I almost left it there, but something made me flip it open. Inside were pages and pages of names, just first and last names, all handwritten in neat capital letters, 1 per line. Next to most of them were dates. Some had single words scribbled beside them. Accident, gone, lost. I didn't recognize most of the names, but then I turned to a page in the middle. My eyes locked on it immediately. My name. Sarah Whitman. Written clearly, just like the others. And next to it, just one word. Next. I just froze. For a second, I couldn't even breathe. I stared at the page like maybe I'd misread it, maybe it was some other Sarah Whitman, but there was no mistaking it. My name was there, in blocky letters. No smudges, no hesitation. And next, in all caps. I kept flipping through the pages, trying to find some kind of pattern. The names before mine, Travis Holman, Denise Kerr, Miles Bradley, all had dates and vague words beside them. I recognized Denise's name. She died in a car crash 2 years ago on Highway 12. Travis? I remembered he slipped off his roof while cleaning gutters. Miles? I wasn't sure, but I vaguely recalled something about him disappearing during a hunting trip. The more I looked, the more it felt like this wasn't just a random list. It was a damn countdown. I wanted to believe it was some kind of joke, a weird, twisted prank by a lonely old man who maybe lost touch with reality. But Ray Barlow never struck me as senile. He was quiet, sure, but sharp. He'd fix a busted locker with a bent paperclip and a lighter. He remembered everyone's birthdays without needing a calendar, and he'd always nod at me in the halls like he knew something I didn't. I closed the notebook and sat there for what felt like an hour. My hands were shaking. I kept glancing around the lounge, half expecting someone to pop out and laugh. Gotcha. But no one came. The building was nearly empty, echoey, and cold. I shoved the notebook into my tote bag and left without saying goodbye to anyone. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I took the notebook to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Maddox is one of those guys who looks like he was carved out of red clay. Square jaw, thick neck, always smells faintly of barbecue. He didn't laugh when I showed him the notebook, but I could tell he was trying hard not to roll his eyes. He thumbed through it slowly, then looked up at me. "You're saying this old janitor had a list of names and all these people are dead?" I nodded. "And yours says next." Another nod. "You think he was planning something?" I didn't know what to say. That's what I was hoping they'd tell me. But instead of answers, Maddox just sighed, told me they'd look into it, and asked if I wanted to file a formal report. I said yes. I didn't leave until he promised to run the names. I should have felt better after that, but I didn't. If anything, the fear got worse. That night, I started noticing things, weird things, like how my porch light kept flickering even after I replaced the bulb. Or how my cat Milo wouldn't go near the living room window. He'd just sit at the doorway and growl, low and guttural, like something was outside. I laughed it off at first. Stress, right? A creepy notebook and a few coincidences don't mean anything. But then I started getting calls on my landline. Dead air every time. No one ever spoke. And when I'd hang up, it would ring again 30 seconds later. Always 30 seconds. I started keeping track. I stopped answering eventually, but that didn't stop the ringing. By the third day, I started locking every door, every window, even during the day. I was jumping at my own reflection. At school, I felt eyes on me constantly, even when the halls were empty. One of my students, a quiet girl named Hannah Pierce, asked if I was okay. I must have looked like hell. I told her I was just tired. But the truth is, I hadn't slept more than 2 hours straight since I found the notebook. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind made my heart skip. And the worst part? Sheriff Maddox stopped returning my calls. When I went back to the station, the deputy said he was out sick and that someone would be in touch. No one ever was. It felt like the whole town had turned into this slow, crawling thing. Like it knew something I didn't. That Friday, I came home from work and found my front door slightly open. I knew I had locked it that morning. I always check it twice, it's a habit. I didn't go in. I backed away, heart pounding so hard it made my ears ring. Called the police from my car. When they arrived, they did a quick sweep and said nothing looked disturbed. But I noticed something missing. The notebook. I had hidden it in my bedroom closet inside an old boot box under a pile of winter coats. I checked. Gone. I asked the officers if they took it, thinking maybe Maddox had finally decided to take it seriously. But they didn't even know what I was talking about. One of them actually laughed and said, "Maybe the ghost of Barlow came back for it." I felt like I was losing it. That night, I stayed at a friend's place. Maggie, another teacher who didn't ask too many questions. I didn't tell her everything, just enough to make it sound like a break-in. She offered me wine, let me sleep on her couch. But around 2:30 in the morning, I woke up to this metallic tapping sound. Not loud, more like someone slowly clicking a coin against a piece of glass. It was coming from the living room window. Maggie lives on the second floor of an old duplex. I sat up slowly, heart racing, and I swear to God, I saw the outline of a man outside her window. Just standing there, head tilted slightly like he was listening. There was no ledge, no balcony, just him, somehow there. When I turned the light on, he was gone. That was my breaking point. I told Maggie everything the next morning. To my surprise, she didn't laugh. She looked terrified. She told me, hesitantly, that she remembered hearing a story years ago about a student who went missing after Ray Barlow warned him to stay away from the woods behind the school. No one ever found the kid. People said Barlow was odd, but maybe he knew things. Maybe he saw patterns, or maybe he made them happen. Maggie didn't say that out loud, but I could see it written all over her face. I told her I didn't care what it meant anymore. I just wanted out. The next day, I packed up my essentials, took a leave of absence from school, and drove to stay with my brother up in Tennessee. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even Maggie. I turned off my phone, deleted social media, and tried to disappear for a while. And for a while it worked. No more tapping on windows, no more phone calls, no one watching me in the hallways. It was like the shadow that had crawled into my life just lifted. I stayed away for 2 full weeks, and when I finally came back to Pine Hollow, just to grab the rest of my things, I found a letter taped to my front door. No envelope, just a single sheet of paper. My name written in all caps at the top, and below it one word: cleared. That's when I realized it was never about being killed or hunted. It was about being watched, judged maybe. Like some invisible system was deciding who stayed and who disappeared. Whatever the notebook was, it wasn't just a list. It was a process, a filter. I don't know why I was spared. Maybe because I ran. Maybe because I told someone. Or maybe because the notebook was taken before anything could happen. I don't have answers, just scars I can't show anyone and a fear that never fully leaves. I don't teach at Pine Hollow anymore. I moved to a different district, started fresh, new town, new apartment. But sometimes late at night I swear I hear a slow tapping on my window again. I was 10 years old when my brother Josh disappeared. We lived in a small town in Vermont called Alders Hollow. Population barely over 1,000, the kind of place where everyone waves to everyone else whether they know you or not. It was late October of 2009, right when the air starts getting sharp and the leaves coat every inch of the ground in this crunchy, copper-colored mess. Josh was 12, 2 years older than me, and we walked home from school together almost every day. There was this trail through the woods behind the old textile mill on Alder Creek Road, a shortcut we used all the time. Everyone used it. It was faster than going through town and just creepy enough to make it feel like an adventure when you were a kid. The mill had been abandoned for as long as I could remember. Half its roof collapsed, windows busted out, the whole structure leaning like it might give in with the next good snowstorm. People said it had shut down in the 70s after some kind of accident, but no one ever really talked about it. Still, it wasn't fenced off or anything. It was just there. A hulking, rotting thing with ivy crawling up its walls and rusted pipes that groaned in the wind. Josh used to joke that it looked like a monster with its mouth half open. We'd pass it every day, and every day we'd dare each other to peek inside one of the busted windows, even though we never actually did. The Thursday started like any other. We had science quizzes that morning, and Josh spent lunch trading hot Cheetos for answers. He always had this cocky grin like nothing could touch him. After school, we cut through the back path as usual. It had rained earlier that week, so the dirt trail was a little soft, and the leaves were matted to the ground. I remember Josh walking ahead, stepping on a branch that made this loud snap. Louder than usual, like it echoed somehow. I slowed down to tie my shoe. When I looked up, he was gone. Just gone. Like he'd vanished mid-step. At first, I thought he was messing with me. That was something he'd do. Hide behind a tree, jump out and scare me, then laugh about it all the way home. So I called his name a few times, louder each time. Nothing. No footsteps, no rustling. The air felt off, still. I didn't know what that meant back then. I just knew something was wrong. I stood there for maybe a minute scanning the trees, until I noticed something further ahead, a dark patch near the foundation of the mill. It wasn't moving, but it wasn't part of the building either. I took a few steps forward, and that's when I saw it. Josh's backpack ripped open down the side with his science book and half a sandwich lying next to it in the mud. I froze. I didn't even think about grabbing the backpack. My brain just kind of stopped. I remember the weirdest detail. His sandwich was barely touched, but there were these little rips in the plastic bag like it had been clawed open, not torn by a person. I didn't see any blood, no footprints, no sign of a struggle, just this awful silence. I turned to run, but my legs felt heavy like I was trying to move underwater. Every sound, the crunch of my steps, the creak of the trees, sounded way too loud. I finally made it back home, breathless, and all I could do was stand there in the doorway, staring at my mom while she kept asking, "Where's your brother? Where's Josh?" I couldn't answer. Something had broken in me the moment I saw that backpack. I didn't sleep that night. Cops came. Then the search dogs, then more cops. They scoured the woods behind the mill for days. Helicopters, volunteers, even kids from school showed up with flashlights and gear. Nothing. Not a single piece of clothing, not a drop of blood. The only other thing they found was some old rusted key buried in the dirt near where I saw the backpack. No one knew what it opened. It looked ancient, like something you'd find in a museum or stuck in the back of your grandpa's junk drawer. The cops didn't know what to make of me. I wouldn't talk. I couldn't. I just kept staring at the floor, tracing the grooves in the wood over and over with my finger, like it would distract my brain from what I saw. Therapists tried. Teachers gave me passes. I got pulled from school for a while. Everyone thought it was trauma. And maybe it was, but the truth is I wasn't just scared. I was afraid to say what I'd really seen after I found the backpack. Because I did see something. I just don't know if anyone would believe me, even now. Right before I ran, I caught a glimpse of something through one of the broken windows of the mill. It was small, too small to be a person, but tall enough to stand upright. Its skin looked wrong, like old paper left out in the rain, and its eyes didn't blink. They just stared. Huge, glassy, unmoving. I remember thinking it looked like a doll that someone had tried to bury and then dug back up. And I swear, just before I turned to run, it smiled. Not a human smile, something crooked. Like it didn't know how to do it right. That was the last thing I saw before everything went black in my head. After that day, I wouldn't go near the woods again. Even when I started speaking again a few months later, I never told anyone what I saw. Not my mom, not the cops, not even the shrink they sent me to. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding insane. It took me years to stop flinching every time I passed a window after dark. My mom eventually moved us to Montpellier to be closer to her sister. She couldn't bear staying in Alders Hollow. Not with the empty bedroom. Not with the way the neighbors stopped asking about Josh after the first year. But here's the thing. Josh wasn't the first kid to go missing behind that mill. Not really. Years later, when I was in high school and finally had the guts to look things up, I found mentions of a boy named Eli Morton, who vanished in 1974. Same age as Josh. Same shortcut. No body, no answers. Just a local article about the search and a single line from the sheriff back then that gave me chills. We found a key. That's all we found. After that, I started digging deeper. Turns out there were 5 other cases over the years. All boys, all between 10 and 13, all gone without a trace, always near the mill. That's when I realized something had been happening in that spot for decades, and nobody talked about it. The grown-ups in Alders Hollow had turned it into some old bedtime legend. Don't play near the mill, they'd say. But it was real. Something was there, and whatever it was, it wanted kids. I think that's why I saw it. It didn't want me, not yet. I was the younger brother. I was supposed to come back and remember. 2 years ago, I went back. I don't know why. I think I needed to see it again, to prove to myself that it was just a rotting building and nothing more. The mill was still there, only worse. Part of it had collapsed completely, but the windows were still there. Same busted glass, same angle. And I swear to you, I didn't even get 10 feet from the place before I heard it. A soft scraping, like nails against wood. I didn't stick around to see what it was. I turned and left, and I'm never going back again. I don't know what that key was for, or what that thing inside the mill really was. All I know is something took my brother and it's still there, waiting for the next kid who strays too close. I don't care if no one believes me. I'm writing this because if anyone in Vermont reads this and lives anywhere near Alder Creek Road, don't take the shortcut. Please, just don't. I've lived in Elridge, Kansas my whole life. It's one of those places you can drive through in under 10 minutes and not even realize you passed a town. I'm 38 now, work nights as a cook at the only diner in town, Stella's. It's been around forever, passed down through 3 generations, and we all know each other by name. Nothing big ever happens here, or at least, nothing we talk about out loud. That day started like any other. Slow breakfast rush, same 3 old-timers arguing over the jukebox, and me back in the kitchen grilling sausage links like I've done 1,000 times before. Around 8:45 that morning, I stepped out to grab more eggs from the storage out back. When I came in, there she was. This girl I'd never seen before, standing behind the counter wearing one of our uniforms. Slim build, pale skin, long dark brown hair tied back with a green ribbon. She looked like she belonged in an old photo. Something about her face felt dated, I guess. Not ugly, not strange, just like she wasn't from this decade. I figured maybe she was a new hire Stella brought in to help during the weekend shift. But Stella wasn't working that day, and nobody had mentioned anything about hiring. The girl smiled at me like we'd met before. "Morning," she said, setting down a glass tip jar near the register. I nodded back and went about my morning, but something about that jar tugged at my attention. It wasn't the usual tips label. This one had a paper taped to it that read, "For local families in need," with a list of names written neatly underneath in black ink. At first I didn't give it much thought. People around here have big hearts and we've had our share of hard times. But later, during the lunch shift, one of the regulars, Jim Carrigan, squinted at the jar and muttered, "Ain't that something? I know that name. And that one too." Jim's an ex-mailman. He knows this town better than Google Maps. He leaned closer, then picked the jar up and said, "These people, they're all dead." That made me stop what I was doing. "You sure?" I asked, half laughing. But he wasn't joking. One by one he started naming off how they died. A house fire on Hollow Creek. The car that veered off the old quarry road. A kid who vanished and was found months later by the riverbank. And yeah, I recognized the names too. Not all at once, but once you heard them out loud, something clicked. The weird thing was, these weren't just dead townsfolk. They were the kind of deaths that left everyone uneasy. Stuff people whispered about but never fully explained. I walked over to the counter and picked up the jar myself. The names were written in perfect cursive, like the kind they taught in schools back in the 60s. I asked the girl, because no one ever introduced her by name, where she got the list. She didn't look up from refilling a coffee cup, just smiled and said, "From the town registry." I wanted to make sure I honored the right people. I remember the way she said honored, like it wasn't about helping families at all, but remembering the dead. I pressed a little more, asked which registry exactly, and she shrugged like it wasn't important. "Old one I found at the library," she said. "Thing is, our library burned down 3 years ago. We never rebuilt." By mid-afternoon, word had spread across the diner. Folks started coming in just to look at the jar. Some got real quiet when they saw the names. Others got angry. One woman, Cheryl Barnes, said her cousin's name was on there, and he died in 2016, in a crash everyone around here still swears didn't make sense. She asked the girl point blank why she'd put his name on it. The girl just said he needed to be remembered. That's when I realized I still didn't know her name. Nobody did. Not even Linda, our shift manager, who's been working the books for over 20 years. She checked the log and found nothing. No application, no background check, no signed W-4. It was like the girl just appeared in the building. Linda got spooked enough to call Stella at home. I heard her on the phone in the back office, whispering like the girl might overhear her. I was standing near the kitchen door when Linda came back out, pale as drywall. She didn't say much, just walked over to the girl and asked where she lived. The girl smiled again, always that same polite, wrong-era smile, and said, "I don't stay in one place long." Then she calmly went back to wiping down the counter. That whole moment was off. Like she wasn't scared to be confronted, like she'd expected it. Around closing time, things got even weirder. I stayed late to help clean, and when I came out of the kitchen around 9:30, the jar was gone. Just gone. No sign of it, and no sign of the girl either. Her apron was draped over the back of a stool, folded too neatly, like someone wanted to leave everything just right. Linda checked the cameras the next morning, but the footage from that entire night was corrupted. Just static. I've worked at Stella's for 17 years. That's never happened before. And no one, I mean no one, ever saw her again. The following morning, the whole town was buzzing. Someone called the local paper, but they didn't print anything. Too sensitive, they said. A few people tried asking around to see if maybe she was related to anyone here, but nobody recognized her. Linda even took a copy of the employee schedule down to the sheriff's office. Deputy McCoy looked it over and said flat out, "This girl was never hired. We don't even have her name on file anywhere." And just like that, it was like she'd never existed. No trace, no name, no paper trail. Just a weird memory and a jar full of names that shouldn't have been known. About a week later, something else happened that stuck with me. Jim, the old mailman, came by again, quiet this time. He said he couldn't stop thinking about the list, and he'd started writing the names down from memory. Said he made it to 13 before he had to stop because he realized something. They were all people who died on the same exact day of the month, every one of them, the 17th. Different years, different causes, but always the 17th. And we checked. He was right. I've never seen Jim look rattled like that before. I wish I could say we got answers, that she came back or someone figured out who she was. But we never did. Some folks think it was a prank. Some think it was a messed up coincidence. But me? I don't know. There was something about her that didn't feel like someone playing a joke. The way she talked, the way she moved. It was like watching someone who had already done it all before. Like she'd been in that diner 100 times, in 100 other towns doing the same thing. Like it was a ritual. I don't work at Stella's anymore. I left that job about 4 months after it all happened. But sometimes, when I'm passing through some small town on the highway, and I see a little diner, I catch myself glancing through the window, half expecting to see her behind the counter, folding napkins or pouring coffee with that same calm smile. And I wonder, if I walked in, would she remember me too? Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The drive out to Black Ridge took us 6 hours from Denver. And honestly, if it wasn't for my buddy Jake's obsession with abandoned places, I never would have made that trip. I was 24 then, fresh out of college with a journalism degree I wasn't using, bartending nights at this dive place downtown while figuring out what to do with my life. Jake worked construction, had this whole YouTube channel about urban exploration that was starting to get some traction, maybe 8,000 subscribers or something like that. He'd been researching Black Ridge for months, found it buried in some Colorado Historical Society archives, this mining town that went from boom to bust, practically overnight in 1978. The official story was that a series of cave-ins made the mines too dangerous, insurance companies pulled out, and without the copper mine, the town just dried up. But Jake had found these old newspaper clippings from nearby towns, little mentions here and there about families leaving in the middle of the night, about the mining company buying up all the local properties for way more than they were worth. We got there around 2 in the afternoon on a Saturday in October, the kind of crisp fall day where the air feels sharp in your lungs. Black Ridge sat in this valley between 2 mountains, and you had to take this dirt road that switched back and forth down the mountainside to reach it. The town itself was smaller than I expected, maybe 40 buildings total, most of them these single-story wooden structures with their roofs caving in. Main Street was just this wide dirt road with storefronts on either side. their windows either broken or boarded up with plywood that had warped and split from decades of weather. What got me right away was how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, but this heavy, pressing silence like the mountains were holding their breath. Jake parked his truck near what used to be a general store, its faded sign still readable. Morrison's Goods and Supplies. We grabbed our backpacks with water, flashlights, and Jake's camera equipment, and started walking through town, our footsteps unnaturally loud on the packed dirt. The first weird thing we noticed was the church at the end of Main Street. Every other building had broken windows, doors hanging off hinges, roofs collapsed, but this church was intact. Not maintained exactly. The white paint was peeling and the wooden steps were rotting, but the windows were whole, the door was shut, and there was even this brass doorknob that hadn't tarnished completely. Jake wanted to film there first, said it would make great B-roll footage, but when we got closer we saw fresh tire tracks in the dirt, maybe a day or two old at most. That should have been our first real warning, but Jake was excited, talking about how maybe there were other urban explorers here recently, how we might find their tags or signatures inside somewhere. We tried the church door, but it was locked, not with some old rusty lock either, but this heavy-duty master lock that couldn't have been more than a year old. The windows were covered from the inside with what looked like black fabric, and when Jake tried to peek through a gap near the window frame, he pulled back and said it smelled wrong in there, like chemicals, like the cleaning supplies his dad used to use at the funeral home he managed. We decided to check out the mining company office instead, this 2-story brick building near the edge of town, with Ridgeline Copper Corporation carved into a stone block above the entrance. The front door was gone completely, just an empty frame leading into darkness, and Jake went in first with his camera light on, me following with my phone flashlight. The first floor was what you'd expect. Desks overturned, papers scattered everywhere, old filing cabinets with their drawers pulled out and emptied. But Jake found this one filing cabinet in a back room that was different, locked with another new lock, just like the church. He had bolt cutters in his truck for situations like this, said it was standard gear for urban exploration, and after 15 minutes of going back and forth about whether we should cut it, curiosity won. Inside were dozens of manila folders, and when we started reading through them, that's when everything changed. These weren't mining records. They were payment ledgers, checks written out to families in Black Ridge, all dated from September and October of 1978, all for amounts between $30,000 and $50,000, which was serious money back then. Each folder had a family name, and inside were these agreements, all with similar language about compensation for relocation and confidentiality regarding mining operations. But the disturbing part was the handwritten notes paperclipped to some of them. Things like, husband refused initial offer, see incident report 7B, or family relocated after consultation with security team. Jake was filming everything, getting close-ups of the documents, when we found this thicker folder at the back labeled Tunnel 4 Incident, Confidential. Inside were photographs, black and white, showing a collapsed mine entrance, but if you looked carefully at one of them, you could see what looked like a torn piece of flannel shirt sticking out from under the rocks. There were medical examiner reports talking about 11 miners who were in Tunnel 4 when it collapsed, but then there was this memo from the company executives saying they'd only reported 7 deaths to the authorities. The other 4 were listed as resolved internally, with payments to their families totaling $200,000. Jake's face went pale reading that, and he kept saying we had to get copies of everything, that this was huge, that people needed to know what really happened here. That's when we heard the truck engine outside, this low diesel rumble that cut through the silence like a knife. We both went to the window, staying low, and saw this old Ford F-250, rust-eaten around the wheel wells, parking right behind Jake's truck. 2 men got out, both probably in their 60s, wearing these identical brown Carhartt jackets and baseball caps. The bigger one, built like a linebacker gone to seed, had this shotgun that he kept casual, broken over his arm like he was going bird hunting. The smaller one, thin with a gray beard down to his chest, was carrying what looked like a gas can. They stood there for a moment looking at Jake's truck, Then the bigger one said something and pointed at the mining office where we were hiding. Jake grabbed my arm so hard it hurt, whispered that we needed to get out the back. But when we crept to the rear of the building, we saw another truck parked there, blocking the back exit, engine running but nobody inside it. We could hear footsteps on the front porch now, slow and deliberate, and that thin guy's voice carried through the broken windows. "We know you're in there. Just want to talk about what you're doing with private property." Jake had his phone out, trying to get signal, but we were too deep in the valley, no bars at all. The footsteps came into the building and we could hear them moving through the front room, not rushing, just walking normal like they had all the time in the world. The bigger guy was talking now, his voice carrying this weird conversational tone. "My grandfather worked Tunnel 4, made good money for the family before the accident. Real shame when outsiders come stirring up old grief, you understand?" We were crouched behind a row of filing cabinets in the back office, and I could feel sweat running down my back even though it was cold. Jake had turned his camera off, was clutching it like a weapon, and I remember thinking how stupid we were, how we should have told someone where we were going, should have seen the red flags. The thin man's voice came from closer now, maybe the next room. "Found their backpacks here, Carl. Couple of water bottles, energy bars. City kids, looks like." Carl laughed, but there was nothing funny in it, just this hollow sound that made my teeth hurt. Then Jake did something I'll never forget. He stood up, walked right out into the open with his hands visible, and started talking in this calm, steady voice I'd never heard him use before. "Hey guys, we're just here taking photos for a college project, documenting ghost towns in Colorado. We didn't mean to trespass, didn't know this was private property. We'll leave right now, no problems." Carl and the thin man were standing maybe 10 feet away, and up close I could see Carl's eyes were this washed-out blue, like sky through dirty glass, and he had these thick scars across his knuckles. The thin man's face was all sharp angles, cheekbones that looked like they could cut paper, and he was smiling but only with his mouth, not his eyes. Carl shifted the shotgun, still not pointing it at us but making sure we saw it, and said, "College project, huh? Then you won't mind showing us what you've been filming. Hand over the camera, son." Jake hesitated for maybe 2 seconds, then passed his camera over. Carl gave it to the thin man, who started scrolling through the footage, his face getting darker with each second. They were in the filing room, Carl. They saw the Tunnel 4 papers. Carl's expression didn't change, but something in his posture did, like a dog getting ready to bite. The thin man pulled out the camera's memory card and put it in his pocket, then dropped the camera on the floor and stomped on it, the crunch of plastic and glass echoing in the empty room. Jake flinched but didn't move otherwise, and I was still half hidden behind the filing cabinets, trying to control my breathing. Carl started talking again, his voice lower now. "You boys need to understand something. This town, these buildings, they're not abandoned. They're protected. My family, the Brennans, the Washburns, we all stayed close after Black Ridge closed. We made promises to people, signed papers just like the ones you were snooping through. The mining company paid good money for our silence, and that money put our kids through school, bought our houses, kept our families fed for 2 generations. He took a step closer to Jake and I could smell him now, cigarettes and motor oil and something sour underneath. But more than that, we gave our word. My grandfather, the thin man's father here, they died keeping that word. And we're not about to let some YouTube kids with cameras destroy what they built." The thin man walked over to where I was crouching and grabbed my shoulder, pulled me up with surprising strength for someone so skinny. His fingers dug into my shoulder blade, and he steered me over to stand next to Jake. "Here's what's going to happen," Carl said, and now he was holding the shotgun with both hands, still not quite pointing it at us, but close enough. "You're going to get in your truck and drive out of here. You're going to forget you ever heard of Black Ridge. You're going to delete any copies of anything you might have uploaded or backed up. If we see you again, if we hear you've been talking about this place, well, mining towns are dangerous. Old tunnels collapse all the time. Sometimes people fall in and never get found." The thin man let go of my shoulder and walked to the window, looked out at the street. "Their truck's not the only vehicle here, Carl. Saw fresh tracks by the church, too. We might have more visitors." Carl's face went tight, and he grabbed Jake by the front of his jacket, pulled him close enough that their faces were inches apart. "You bring friends? How many people know you're here?" Jake shook his head, said it was just us, swore on his mother's life, but Carl didn't look convinced. That's when we heard it. A woman's voice calling out from somewhere near the church, young and clear. "Hello, is someone there? My car broke down on the mountain road and I saw the trucks down here." Carl and the thin man exchanged this look, and without a word, the thin man headed for the door, moving faster than I'd seen him move before. Carl kept his attention on us, but I could see him thinking, calculating something behind those faded eyes. "Looks like this is your lucky day, boys," he said finally. "We've got a more pressing problem now, but here's the deal. You're going to walk with me to your truck, nice and calm, and you're going to drive out of here. The thin man's going to follow you to the county line. Make sure you keep going. And if your phones somehow start working on the way out, you forget our faces, forget our names, forget everything except that Black Ridge is a dangerous place where people get hurt." He marched us outside, the shotgun now definitely pointed in our direction, and I could see the thin man talking to a young woman near the church, maybe mid-20s, wearing hiking gear. She looked confused but not scared yet, and the thin man was gesturing toward her car, probably offering to help. Carl stood next to Jake's truck while we got in, then leaned into Jake's window and grabbed his wallet from his pocket before Jake could react. He pulled out Jake's driver's license, held it up so we could both see it, then put it in his own pocket. "Nathan Garfield, 1847 Colfax Avenue, Denver," he read out loud. "I'll keep this as insurance. You stay quiet, you'll get it mailed back in a month. You talk well, I know where you live now, don't I?" He stepped back, gestured for us to leave, and Jake started the truck with shaking fingers. As we drove down Main Street, I looked back and saw the thin man leading the woman toward the mining office, his hand on her elbow, Carl following behind them. The woman was looking around now, and something in her body language had changed, like she'd realized something was wrong. Jake drove faster, taking the switchbacks up the mountain so fast I thought we'd go over the edge. Neither of us spoke until we hit the highway, and then Jake pulled over and threw up on the side of the road. We never talked about reporting it. What would we say? That we'd broken into private property and found old documents? That some locals threatened us? Jake got his license back exactly 1 month later, no return address, and we never spoke about Black Ridge again. But sometimes I Google it, and there's nothing, no stories about missing hikers, no news about that woman. Maybe she was one of them. Maybe her car really did break down. Or maybe there's another folder in that filing cabinet now. Another incident that was resolved internally. The call about Uncle Howard's estate came on a Thursday afternoon in early September. I was 32, living paycheck to paycheck fixing computers in a cramped shop in Philadelphia, when the lawyer told me I'd inherited everything. Howard Beaumont wasn't exactly close family. He was my mother's older brother who'd cut ties with everyone about 15 years ago after some argument nobody talked about. Mom passed 5 years back, so when the lawyer mentioned Howard had no other living relatives, I became the default beneficiary. The Victorian house sat in Stillwater, a town of maybe 800 people tucked into the hills of northern Pennsylvania, about 4 hours from where I lived. I'd never been there, never even heard Howard mention the place before he disappeared from our lives. The lawyer, a gravelly-voiced man named Fredrickson, said Howard had been found dead of a heart attack in his study, surrounded by boxes of old newspapers and what looked like research materials. I drove out there that Saturday morning, leaving before dawn to beat the traffic. The GPS led me through winding mountain roads that got narrower the closer I got to Stillwater, until I was following a cracked 2-lane that hadn't seen maintenance since the Bush administration. The town itself looked forgotten, a main street with half the shops boarded up, a diner with 3 pickup trucks parked outside, and a gas station where the attendant stared at me like I'd grown a second head when I mentioned Howard's name. The house stood at the edge of town, up a gravel drive lined with overgrown hedges that scraped against my car. It was massive, 3 stories of peeling gray paint and ornate woodwork, with a wraparound porch that sagged in places and windows that reflected the afternoon sun like blank eyes. The key was under a stone frog by the front steps, exactly where Fredrickson said it would be. When I pushed open the heavy oak door, the smell hit me immediately. Dust, old paper, and something else. Something chemical and sharp that made my nose burn. The study was exactly where Fredrickson described it. First door on the right past the grand staircase. Howard had transformed it into something between a library and a detective's evidence room. Every wall was covered with corkboards, and every corkboard was covered with newspaper clippings, photographs, and handwritten notes connected by different colored strings. Red string for disappearances, blue for property records, green for something labeled society activities, in Howard's cramped handwriting. A massive oak desk dominated the center of the room, its surface buried under stacks of yellowed documents and leather journals. I picked up the nearest journal, dated just 3 weeks before Howard died. The first entry made my breath catch. They know I'm getting close. Found another pipe in the basement wall today behind the wine rack. Same diameter as the others. Whatever they were moving through this house, they needed a network for it. I set the journal down and walked closer to the corkboards, trying to make sense of the chaos. The disappearances went back decades. The oldest clipping was from 1978, about a traveling salesman whose car was found abandoned near the house. Then a hitchhiker in 1983, a runaway teenager in 1991, a homeless veteran in 2006, all last seen within a mile of this property. Howard had marked each one with a red pin on a hand-drawn map of Stillwater, and all the pins formed a rough circle around the Victorian. But it was the photographs that really got to me. Black and white shots from what looked like the 1950s, showing groups of men in suits standing in front of the house, their faces serious and purposeful. One photo had names written on the back in fading ink. The Stillwater Preservation Committee, 1953. I recognized some of the surnames. They matched the businesses in town, the ones that were still open. The Brennan Hardware Store, the Garrison Diner. These weren't random historical photos. These were the grandfathers and fathers of people still living in Stillwater. I spent the next 2 hours going through Howard's research, and the picture that emerged made my mouth go dry. The Stillwater Preservation Committee wasn't about preserving the town's history. It was about preserving their secrets. Howard had found property records showing that the Victorian had been purchased by the committee in 1952, but kept in rotating names of individual members to avoid suspicion. They'd meet here monthly, according to Howard's surveillance notes from the past year. He'd photographed license plates, documented arrival times, even recorded snippets of conversation through a device he'd planted near the back entrance. One transcript stood out. The new infrastructure is almost complete. 3 more months and we can resume operations at full capacity. That was dated just 6 weeks ago. I found myself pacing the room, trying to process what Howard had uncovered. This wasn't some conspiracy theory from a lonely old man. He had receipts, documentation, proof that something organized was happening in this house. The basement door was in the kitchen, painted shut with so many layers that I had to use a knife to break the seal. The wooden steps groaned under my weight, and that chemical smell got stronger with each step down. The basement was massive, running the full length of the house with stone walls that wept moisture, and a concrete floor that looked newer than it should. Howard had been busy down here too. Chalk marks on the walls, measurements written in white, and in the far corner, the wine rack he'd mentioned pulled away from the wall. Behind it was a hole, maybe 8 inches in diameter, running horizontally into the wall. I got on my knees and shined my phone's flashlight inside. The pipe was PVC, modern, and it branched off in multiple directions like a network of veins. But what really made me pull back was the smell coming from inside, concentrated and medical, like a hospital corridor at 3 in the morning. I stood up and noticed something else. Fresh scratches on the concrete floor, leading from the pipe to a drain in the center of the room that looked recently installed. That's when I heard the front door open upstairs. Not a subtle creak, but a confident push, like someone with their own key. Footsteps followed. multiple sets, heavy and deliberate. I killed my phone's flashlight and moved behind the furnace, my heart hammering against my ribs. The footsteps spread out above me, some heading toward the study, others moving through the house with purpose. Through the floorboards, I heard a woman's voice, clear and authoritative. "Check every room. Make sure he didn't leave anything new." "The nephew's car is here, so he's probably in town asking questions," a man responded. "Garrison already called. Kid stopped at the diner an hour ago, was showing Howard's photo around." My legs felt weak. They'd been watching me since I arrived. The woman spoke again. "Good. We'll have maybe 20 minutes before he comes back. Get the remaining documents from the study and check if Howard found the secondary hub in the attic." Secondary hub. There was more than just the basement setup. I waited until the footsteps moved away from the kitchen before creeping back to the stairs. Through a crack in the door, I could see legs passing by. At least 4 people, maybe 5. They moved like they owned the place, which according to Howard's research, they essentially did. I recognized one voice from the diner that morning, the cook who'd served me coffee and asked if I was just passing through. My phone vibrated in my pocket, making me nearly jump out of my skin. A text from an unknown number. "Mr. Beaumont, this is Fredrickson. Please call immediately. Urgent information about your uncle's estate." But Fredrickson had specifically told me he was unreachable on weekends, gone fishing until Monday. Whoever was upstairs had my phone number. I turned the phone completely off and shoved it deep in my pocket. The basement had another exit. Howard had marked it on one of his hand-drawn floor plans. An old coal chute that led to the side yard, hidden behind a metal shelf full of paint cans. I started moving toward it, trying to remember the exact location from the diagram. The metal shelf was exactly where Howard had marked it, but moving it quietly was impossible. The moment I touched it, a paint can tumbled, hitting the concrete with a crash that echoed through the basement. The footsteps upstairs stopped immediately. "Did you hear that?" someone asked. The woman's voice cut through. "He's in the basement. Thompson, Garrison blocked the exits, Brennan with me." The kitchen door flew open and feet pounded down the stairs. I abandoned stealth and shoved the shelf aside, revealing the coal chute, a narrow metal tunnel angling up toward daylight. I scrambled inside just as flashlights swept the basement behind me. The chute was tighter than it looked, covered in decades of coal dust and rust that blackened my clothes and filled my lungs. Halfway up, my shoulders wedged tight. Behind me, someone shouted, "He's in the chute!" I heard metal scraping. They were trying to grab my legs. Panic gave me strength I didn't know I had. I twisted, pulled, and scraped my way up until I burst out into daylight, gasping and coughing black dust. The side yard was bordered by thick woods, and I ran straight for them without looking back. Branches tore at my clothes and face as I crashed through the underbrush, following what looked like an old deer trail. Behind me, car doors slammed and engines roared to life. They'd have to take the long way around to reach this part of the woods by vehicle, giving me maybe a 5-minute head start. Howard had been smarter than I'd realized. His journals mentioned multiple cache sites around the property where he'd hidden copies of his research. The closest one was beneath a distinctive rock formation about a quarter mile into the woods, marked by 3 white blazes on a massive oak tree. I found it after 10 minutes of desperate searching. A waterproof container buried under loose stones containing flash drives, photocopies, and a prepaid phone with a single number programmed in. The contact was listed as insurance. I called it while moving deeper into the woods, and a young woman answered on the first ring. "Mr. Howard, thank God you're—" I cut her off. "Howard's dead. This is his nephew. I have his research. They're after me right now." There was a pause, then her voice went sharp and professional. "Listen carefully. I'm Agent Diane Russo with the DEA. Howard was helping us build a case. Those pipes you probably found? They're distribution infrastructure for synthetic fentanyl. The Stillwater Preservation Committee has been using that house as a hub for 40 years. First for methamphetamines, now for fentanyl. They process it in the attic, move it through the pipe system to avoid detection, and dispose of evidence through that drainage system. The disappearances Howard tracked? Those were people who got too close to the truth or threatened their operation. We're 40 minutes out with a full tactical team. Can you stay hidden? I told her about my location, and she guided me to a ranger station 2 miles north that had been abandoned for years but still had a reinforced basement. I made it there just as I heard dogs barking in the distance. They'd brought out trackers. The ranger station was a concrete block building with boards over the windows and a heavy steel door that still locked from the inside. I barricaded myself in the basement and waited, listening to the dogs get closer, then farther, then closer again as they tried to pick up my trail. 37 minutes later, the woods exploded with sirens and helicopter rotors. Through a crack in the boarded window, I watched federal agents in tactical gear swarm the Victorian house and the surrounding area. The committee members who'd been hunting me were arrested on the spot, caught with weapons and evidence they'd removed from Howard's study. Agent Russo found me an hour later, after the scene was secure. She told me Howard had contacted them 6 months ago, after discovering the drug operation, and he'd been systematically documenting everything to build an airtight case. His heart attack was suspicious, but they couldn't prove murder yet. The house would be seized as evidence, along with 3 other properties in town that served as distribution points. 23 people were arrested that day, including the mayor and the police chief. The Stillwater Preservation Committee had controlled the town for decades, using it as a perfect cover for their operation. Small, isolated, with a population trained not to ask questions. I gave my testimony, handed over Howard's research, and never went back to Stillwater. The government seized the house, and I received a settlement from Howard's actual estate, mostly his savings and life insurance. It was enough to start over somewhere far from Pennsylvania. Sometimes I think about those missing people Howard tracked, wonder if they'll ever find them. Russo told me they excavated parts of the property but wouldn't tell me what they found. Some questions are better left unasked. "4 months ago, I inherited a diner from my great-aunt Dolores, someone I'd only met twice in my entire life. The lawyer called me on a Wednesday afternoon while I was sitting in my cramped Chicago apartment, scrolling through job listings after another failed interview. He said Dolores had left me her business in Gravelton, Iowa, a town so small it barely showed up on GPS. I remember laughing at first, thinking it was some kind of scam, but the paperwork was legitimate. The Blue Moon Diner, established 1952, complete with all equipment, recipes, and a small apartment above the restaurant. After 6 months of unemployment and dwindling savings, I figured why not give small-town life a shot. The worst that could happen was I'd fail and come back to the city with a story to tell. At least that's what I told myself as I packed my Honda Accord with everything I owned. Gravelton turned out to be one of those towns where Main Street was literally the main street, lined with brick buildings that hadn't changed since the 60s. Population 847, according to the weathered sign at the town limits. The Blue Moon sat right in the middle of downtown, sandwiched between a barber shop and an antique store that looked permanently closed. When I first walked in with the keys jangling in my hand, the place smelled like old grease and lemon cleaner, that distinctive diner smell that gets into everything. The locals started showing up within minutes of my arrival. Mrs. Holloway from the post office bringing me a casserole, Tom from the gas station offering to help fix the broken neon sign, and at least a dozen others who just wanted to welcome the new owner. They were almost aggressively friendly, each one mentioning how glad they were to see the diner opening again, how the town hadn't been the same without it. Their enthusiasm seemed genuine, but there was something in their eyes when they looked at me, a kind of careful watchfulness that made me uncomfortable. The first week was a blur of cleaning, organizing, and trying to make sense of Aunt Dolores' system. She'd kept everything meticulously organized, inventory lists dating back decades, supplier contacts written in perfect cursive, and a metal lockbox in the office that I couldn't open. The key wasn't with the others the lawyer had given me. I found her recipe collection in a filing cabinet, each one handwritten on index cards yellowed with age, some dating back to the original owner. There was something oddly specific about the measurements, not just a pinch of salt, but 3/8 teaspoon precisely, not seasoned to taste, but exact amounts of every spice. The cards were covered in plastic sleeves, protected like precious documents. Mrs. Holloway stopped by every morning for coffee, always sitting at the counter, always ordering the same thing. She'd watch me work with those sharp blue eyes, occasionally offering advice about suppliers or which customers liked their eggs over easy versus scrambled. By the second week, I had the place running smoothly enough to open for breakfast and lunch. The crowd surprised me. Apparently everyone in Gravelton and the surrounding farms had been waiting for the Blue Moon to reopen. They ordered like they'd been starving for months, especially the daily specials that I made from Dolores's recipes. The meatloaf on Mondays, chicken pot pie on Wednesdays, and the famous Blue Moon chili on Fridays that people actually called ahead to reserve. George, who ran the hardware store, told me that chili recipe had been in the diner for 70 years, never changed, never shared. People drove from 3 towns over just for a bowl. I followed those recipe cards religiously, measuring everything exactly as written, and the compliments poured in. "Tastes just like Dolores used to make," they'd say, or "haven't had this since the diner closed." The cash register rang constantly, and I started thinking maybe this inheritance was actually a blessing. Everything changed when I found the newspaper clippings. I was cleaning out the basement storage room, trying to make space for new supplies, when I knocked over a box of old promotional materials. Behind it, wrapped in plastic, was a collection of articles from the Gravelton Gazette dated 1987. "Mystery Illness Strikes 5 at Blue Moon Diner," read the first headline. Then, "Police Investigate Possible Poisoning at Local Restaurant," and "Blue Moon Temporarily Closed as Death Toll Rises to 3. My knees went weak as I read through them. 3 people had died after eating the Friday special, the chili. 2 more were hospitalized for weeks. The police investigated for months but never found evidence of intentional poisoning. The health department cleared the diner, saying it must have been a contaminated batch of meat or vegetables. But there was one article, smaller than the others, that mentioned how strange it was that only certain customers got sick, all of them newcomers to town, all of them eating alone at the counter. I sat on that cold basement floor for an hour, reading and rereading every article. The diner had reopened just 2 months after the incident, under the same ownership. The town had seemingly forgotten about it, or chosen to. There were photos of the victims, a traveling salesman from Nebraska, a young woman passing through on her way to Minneapolis, and an elderly man who'd just moved to Gravelton to be closer to his daughter. All strangers, all dead within days of eating at the Blue Moon. The articles mentioned that the recipes were tested extensively, but nothing toxic was found. The ingredients were normal, the preparation standard. Yet somehow, 3 people had died. I thought about all the meals I'd served in the past 2 weeks, all those recipe cards I'd followed so precisely, and felt sick. When I finally climbed back upstairs, the dinner rush was starting, and through the window I could see the familiar faces of locals already filling up the booths, chatting and laughing like nothing in the world could be wrong. That night, I couldn't bring myself to cook. I told everyone I was feeling under the weather and closed early. Mrs. Holloway seemed particularly concerned, patting my hand with her weathered fingers and telling me to get some rest. After everyone left, I went straight to the office and tried everything I could think of to open that metal lockbox. Paper clips, screwdrivers, even a hammer from the maintenance closet. Finally, around midnight, I found a small key taped to the underside of Dolores's desk drawer. Inside the box were 2 sets of recipe cards, identical to the ones I'd been using, except for tiny differences. The chili recipe in the lockbox called for regular paprika, while the one in the filing cabinet specified Hungarian paprika from the Morrison family farm. The meatloaf in the box used standard breadcrumbs. The filed version required breadcrumbs from Thursday's unsold wheat loaf ground fine. Every single recipe had these small variations, and at the bottom of the locked set was a note in Dolores's handwriting, "For strangers passing through." The implications hit me like ice water in the veins. 2 sets of recipes, one for locals, one for strangers. I grabbed my laptop and searched for more information about the 1987 incident, diving deep into old forums and archived pages. I found a memorial page for one of the victims, Janet Bauer, created by her sister. She'd written about how Janet was just driving through, had stopped for lunch on recommendation from a gas station attendant. She'd sat at the counter, ordered the special, and was dead 4 days later from what doctors called an unusual toxic reaction. The sister mentioned something that made me stop breathing. Janet had taken photos of her meal, and in one of them you could see Mrs. Holloway in the background, sitting at her usual spot at the counter, eating the same chili. Perfectly fine. I went back to the kitchen and compared the 2 chili recipes again. The difference was in 3 ingredients. The paprika sauce, a specific type of cumin that had to be locally ground, and something called prairie sage that the regular recipe didn't include at all. The next morning, Friday, I woke up with a decision to make. The breakfast crowd would expect the diner to open at 6, and by noon people would be calling about the chili. I dressed slowly, my mind racing through the possibilities. Maybe the local ingredients had developed some kind of natural immunity in the townspeople over generations. Maybe it was all coincidence. But I knew better. This was deliberate. The whole town had to know. Mrs. Holloway with her watchful eyes. Tom, who'd been so eager to help. George, who'd praised the sacred recipes. They were all eating the safe versions while strangers got something else. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That I found 2 sets of recipes with slight variations? That people died 37 years ago from food poisoning that was never proven intentional? They'd think I was paranoid. Plus, the local sheriff, Bill Crawford, ate lunch at the diner 3 times a week, always greeting everyone by name, always knowing who belonged and who didn't. I opened the diner that morning because I needed to understand more. The breakfast rush came and went, locals ordering their usual, chatting about the weather and corn prices. Around 11, I started preparing the chili, using the safe recipe from the filing cabinet. As I stirred the pot, Mrs. Holloway walked in for her pre-lunch coffee. She watched me add the Hungarian paprika, nodding approvingly. Dolores always said the secret was in the details, she said, her voice casual but her eyes sharp. She knew every family in this town, where they grew their herbs, which farms had the best spices. It's what made this place special. Then a man walked in I'd never seen before, pulling off his sunglasses, checking his phone for signal. Out-of-state plates on his car, California from what I could see. He sat at the counter, exactly where Janet Bauer had sat in that photo, and asked what was good. Mrs. Holloway turned to look at him, then at me, and I swear the temperature in the room dropped. "The chili's our Friday special," she said before I could speak. "Everyone loves the chili." My hand stayed steady as I ladled the chili into a bowl, the safe version I'd been making all morning. I could feel Mrs. Holloway's eyes boring into my back as I set it down in front of the man from California. He took a big spoonful, smiled, and said it was excellent. Mrs. Holloway's coffee cup clinked against her saucer, a sharp sound in the quiet diner. More locals started filing in for lunch, and I noticed how they all glanced at the stranger, then at me, these quick little assessments that I'd never paid attention to before. George came in and took his regular booth, but instead of his usual friendly wave, he just stared. The man from California finished his chili, left a $20 for a $12 meal, and walked out alive and healthy. The moment his car pulled away, the atmosphere shifted. Holloway stood up, left exact change for her coffee, and walked out without a word. One by one, the other customers followed, leaving their meals half-eaten, filing out in silence until I was alone in the diner that had been packed 5 minutes before. That afternoon, nobody came in. Not for coffee, not for pie, not even to use the bathroom. The phone didn't ring once. As I cleaned the empty tables, I found a note tucked under the register, written in careful cursive, "Dolores understood her responsibility. Gravelton takes care of its own." I packed that night, throwing everything into garbage bags and boxes, not caring what got broken. I loaded my car in the dark, knowing they were watching from behind curtains and through cracked doors. The lockbox with the poisoned recipes went with me. Evidence maybe, or insurance, I wasn't sure. As I drove out of Gravelton at dawn, passing that population sign one last time, I understood what they hadn't written in those newspaper articles. This wasn't about hatred or violence. It was about preservation. A town of 847 people who'd learned, maybe during some famine or disaster decades ago, that certain local plants processed certain ways created immunity in those who consumed them regularly, but were toxic to outsiders. They'd turned survival into tradition, protection into poison, using the diner as their gate, their filter, their way of keeping Gravelton exactly as it was. I drove straight through to Chicago, only stopping for gas, never eating at diners, and filed a report with the FBI that probably went nowhere. The Blue Moon is closed now, I heard, waiting for the next distant relative to inherit it, someone who might be more understanding of small-town traditions. The drive from Michigan to Arizona was supposed to be our big adventure after college graduation. Just me and my best friend Kelsey, two 23-year-olds with nothing but time, and her beat-up Ford Explorer packed with way too many snacks and a carefully curated road trip playlist. We'd been on the road for 3 days when we saw the exit sign for Riverbend, somewhere in the middle of Missouri. Kelsey had read about it in one of those America's Forgotten Towns articles she was always finding online. The article called it a place frozen in time, with this old mill from the 1800s that supposedly still had all the original equipment inside. She practically begged me to make the detour, said it would only add an hour to our trip. I should have paid attention to how the gas station attendant 20 miles back had gone quiet when Kelsey mentioned where we were headed. The town itself looked normal enough at first glance, maybe 500 people. A single main road with a few shops, a diner with one of those vintage neon signs that probably hadn't been updated since the 60s. But there was something about how empty the streets were for a Saturday afternoon in June. We passed maybe 3 people total on our way through town, and each one of them watched our car like they were memorizing the license plate. The mill was on the far edge of town, past a cluster of houses that all had their curtains drawn, despite the beautiful weather. Kelsey was practically bouncing in her seat, going on about the architecture and how these old mills were engineering marvels for their time. The building was massive, built from weathered red brick with a water wheel that hadn't turned in decades. The no trespassing signs were everywhere, but the fence had so many gaps it seemed more like a suggestion than an actual barrier. We squeezed through one of the gaps, and I remember the smell hit us immediately, musty and metallic, like old pennies mixed with rotting wood. The main floor was exactly what you'd expect from an abandoned mill. Rusted machinery, broken windows letting in shafts of dusty light, graffiti from teenagers who'd probably been using this place as a party spot for years. Kelsey was taking pictures of everything, especially this massive grinding stone that must have weighed several tons. I wandered toward what looked like an old office area in the back corner. The door was barely hanging on its hinges, and when I pushed it open, I found filing cabinets that had been ransacked years ago, papers scattered everywhere. But underneath an overturned desk, partially hidden by decades of dust and debris, I spotted something that made me call Kelsey over immediately. A leather wallet, vintage-looking, maybe from the 70s based on the style. Inside the wallet was a driver's license for someone named Douglas Hartley from Kansas, expired in 1978. There was still cash in it, $43 in old bills, family photos of kids who'd be in their 50s or 60s now if their dad ever made it home. Kelsey found another wallet wedged behind the filing cabinet, this one from 1983, belonging to a woman from Oklahoma. Then we found more, a lot more. They were everywhere once we started really looking, stuffed in drawers, shoved into cracks in the walls, some in a cardboard box behind the machinery. Different decades, different states, but all from people passing through. My chest got tight as we counted them. 37 wallets, 11 purses, Over 20 loose IDs. Some were so old the lamination was peeling, others looked like they could have been dropped yesterday. One military ID from 1969 showed a young guy in uniform, who couldn't have been older than 19. Kelsey's face had gone pale, and she kept saying we needed to call the police, that this was evidence of something horrible. I was already pulling out my phone when I realized I had no signal. Not even emergency calls would go through. Kelsey checked hers too. Same thing, which was weird because we'd had full bars in town just 20 minutes ago. We decided to document everything first, take photos of all the IDs so we'd have proof when we got back to town and could find a phone. While Kelsey was photographing, I noticed something else that made my mouth go dry. Mixed in with all the personal items were sets of car keys, dozens of them. Old Ford keys, Chevy, some with those plastic dealership tags still attached, rental car fobs from companies that probably didn't even exist anymore. These people hadn't just walked away from their wallets, they'd never made it back to their vehicles. That's when we heard the mill door slam shut. Not the wind. There wasn't any wind that day. The sound echoed through the whole building, deliberate and final. Through the broken windows, I could see someone had wrapped a chain around the door handles from the outside. Then came footsteps, multiple sets, walking around the perimeter of the building. Kelsey grabbed my arm so hard it hurt, and we both crouched behind the machinery trying to control our breathing. Male voices, at least 3 different ones, casual like they were discussing the weather. One of them mentioned that he'd seen our Explorer parked out front, said it had Michigan plates, probably worth decent money at the chop shop over in Frankfurt. Another voice, older and gravelly, said something about waiting until dark, that it was cleaner that way. They knew we were in there. They were just deciding what to do with us. The men kept talking, and pieces of their conversation drifted through the broken windows. One mentioned that the sheriff would be at his daughter's recital until evening. Apparently, the sheriff was in on this too. Another said something about how the last couple who'd come through had a nice BMW, sold for 15 grand once they stripped it down. They were so matter-of-fact about it, like they were discussing farming or fishing, not murder. Kelsey was typing frantically on her phone, trying to get any message out, but nothing would send. I remembered seeing an old loading dock door on the other side of the building when we'd walked around earlier. If we could get there without being seen, maybe we could slip out while they were still at the front. We started crawling, staying low, using the massive machinery as cover. Every sound we made seemed impossibly loud. Our knees on the gritty floor, our breathing, even our heartbeats felt like they'd give us away. We made it about halfway when I saw him through a gap in the machinery. A man in coveralls standing by what used to be the mill's water intake. He was maybe 50, weathered face, holding a rifle like he'd been born with it. He wasn't looking for us, just standing guard, patient as a statue. Behind him, through another broken window, I could see 2 more men positioned at different corners of the building. They had us surrounded without even trying, like they'd done this before, knew exactly where people would try to run. Kelsey saw them too, and I watched the hope drain from her face. But then she pointed to something I hadn't noticed. An old grain chute in the floor, probably used to move product to a lower level. The metal grate covering it was rusted through in places. If there was a basement or sub-level, maybe there was another way out, something these men didn't know about or had forgotten after all these years. The grate came loose easier than expected. The rust had eaten through most of the bolts. The drop was maybe 8 feet into complete darkness. I went first, landing hard on what felt like packed dirt and old grain that had turned to powder. The smell down there was worse, stale air that hadn't circulated in decades mixed with something else, something organic and wrong. Kelsey dropped down behind me, and we used our phone flashlights to look around. The basement was a maze of support pillars and old storage areas. Along one wall were wooden shelves that had mostly collapsed, and scattered on the floor were more personal belongings. Watches, rings, a child's toy bear from who knows how long ago. But what really got me was the scratches on the wooden pillars, deep gouges at about shoulder height, some with dark stains around them. People had been kept down here. People had tried to claw their way out. Kelsey found the tunnel first, an old drainage pipe maybe 4 feet in diameter, leading away from the mill toward what we hoped was the river. The metal was corroded but intact, and when we shined our lights down it, we could see it extended beyond the range of the beam. We could hear the men above us now, their footsteps heavy on the old floorboards, calling out that they knew we were there, that we might as well come out and make this easy. One of them must have noticed the open grate because suddenly there was shouting, angry now instead of casual. We didn't have a choice. We crawled into that pipe, our phones in our mouths for light, moving as fast as we could through decades of sediment and God knows what else. The pipe seemed endless, and behind us, echoing in the metal, we could hear them entering the basement, their voices distorted but getting closer. After what felt like hours, but was probably 10 minutes, the pipe opened up into a concrete junction box near the river, about a quarter-mile from the mill. We pulled ourselves out, covered in rust and filth, our hands and knees torn up from the crawl. The sun was starting to set, painting everything orange and red. We ran along the riverbank, staying in the trees, circling back toward town and Kelsey's Explorer. We could see the mill in the distance, see flashlights moving around inside, searching. When we finally made it to the car, our hands were trembling so bad, Kelsey dropped the keys twice. The engine turned over on the 3rd try, and we drove straight through town doing 60 on their little main street. Nobody tried to stop us, but I saw curtains moving in windows, faces watching. At the gas station 20 miles out, the same attendant from before was still on shift. When he saw us, covered in dirt and rust, eyes wild with fear, he just nodded slowly and said we were lucky. Said most people who stop in Riverbend don't stop anywhere else after that. We drove straight through to Arizona, 15 hours without stopping except for gas. Kelsey wanted to call the FBI, the state police, anybody who would listen. I convinced her to wait until we got somewhere safe. In Phoenix, we filed reports with everyone we could think of. We had the photos of all those IDs, descriptions of the men, everything. The FBI agent who interviewed us seemed interested at first, but after he made some calls, his whole demeanor changed. He said they'd look into it, but that sometimes old mills collect debris over the years, that people lose things, that we were probably just spooked by some locals pulling a prank. 2 weeks later, Kelsey got a call saying our report had been closed due to lack of evidence. When we checked online, every photo we'd taken in that mill was corrupted, showing nothing but black screens. Riverbend doesn't show up on Google Maps anymore. The exit we took is just empty highway now, according to the navigation. But I know it's still there. That little town with its covered-up secrets, waiting for the next car with out-of-state plates to pull off the interstate, curious about a forgotten piece of America. The morning I drove into Black Hollow, West Virginia, I was 32 years old and had exactly $800 left in my checking account. 2 weeks earlier, the marketing firm where I'd worked for 7 years had let go half their staff, including me, and my severance barely covered what I owed on credit cards. A friend from college mentioned she knew someone renting out a cabin dirt cheap in the Appalachians, only $200 a month if I paid 3 months up front. The photos showed a simple wooden structure surrounded by pine trees, with a stone fireplace and basic furniture, perfect for someone who needed to disappear for a while and figure out their next move. The GPS lost signal about 20 miles before I reached the turnoff, and I had to follow handwritten directions the owner had texted me, counting mailboxes and looking for a rusted green water tower. The first person I encountered was at the only gas station in town, a cramped building with wood paneling that looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s. The attendant, a woman probably in her 60s with gray hair pulled back tight, watched me pump gas through the window. When I went inside to pay, she studied my face while running my card, then asked if I was heading up to the Garrett place. That's what she called it. Not a cabin or rental, but the Garrett place. I nodded, and she exchanged a look with an older man buying cigarettes. Just a quick glance that lasted maybe half a second. She handed back my card without saying anything else, but the man followed me outside and stood by his truck, pretending to check his phone while obviously watching me load my groceries. His truck had a faded sticker on the back window, some kind of eagle holding arrows, and below it text I couldn't quite make out. The cabin sat at the end of a dirt road that wound through dense forest for about 3 miles. Every 100 yards or so, I noticed these orange paint marks on trees, always 3 diagonal slashes, always on the right side of the road. The rental listing hadn't mentioned neighbors, but I passed 2 driveways with heavy chains across them and no trespassing signs that looked handmade, with additional warnings spray-painted on plywood. One said, "We don't call 911 with a crude drawing of a rifle underneath. The key was hidden under a fake rock near the front door, just like the owner promised, though I noticed fresh tire tracks in the mud that weren't from my car." Inside, the cabin was clean but had this strange smell, like copper pennies mixed with pine cleaner. The furniture was older than the photos suggested, and in the bedroom closet, someone had left behind a cardboard box filled with what looked like military surplus items. Ammunition boxes, canvas bags with weird insignia, and a stack of photocopied papers I didn't look through. The isolation hit me that first night, when I realized I couldn't hear anything except wind through trees. No cars, no distant neighbors, no planes overhead. Around 9 o'clock, while I was reading on the couch, I heard footsteps on the wooden porch, slow and deliberate. Through the front window, I saw a man standing there, not knocking, just standing with his hands in his pockets facing the door. He was maybe 50, wearing a baseball cap and work clothes, completely still like he was waiting for something. I didn't move, didn't turn on more lights, just watched him through a gap in the curtains. After about 5 minutes, he walked back down the steps and disappeared into the darkness. I couldn't see a vehicle anywhere, which meant he'd walk through the woods to get here. I pushed a chair against the front door that night, telling myself I was being paranoid, that maybe he was just checking on the property for the owner. The next morning, I found boot prints circling the entire cabin, going right up to each window. Some stopped under the bathroom window, the prints deeper there like someone had stood in that spot for a while. On the back door, someone had drawn 3 diagonal lines in the dirt, matching those orange marks on the trees. I tried calling the owner but got voicemail, so I drove back to town for cell service and to feel less isolated. At a small diner on the main road, I sat at the counter and ordered coffee. The waitress, a younger woman with blonde hair and tired eyes, leaned close when she poured and whispered that I should leave. Just that, nothing else. "You should leave." Then walked away like nothing happened. When I tried to pay, she wouldn't look at me, and I noticed her hands trembling as she made change. The cook in the back, visible through the service window, kept staring at me with this flat expression, not hostile exactly, but like he was memorizing my face. On my way back to the cabin, a pickup truck followed me from town, staying about 50 feet behind, matching my speed exactly. It wasn't the same truck from the gas station. This one was newer, dark blue with tinted windows. At the turnoff to the cabin's dirt road, I stopped, and the truck stopped too, just sitting there with the engine running. We stayed like that for maybe 30 seconds before I turned, and the truck continued straight, but slow. So slow, it couldn't have been going more than 10 miles per hour. When I got back, the cardboard box from the closet was now on the kitchen table, the papers spread out like someone had been reading them. They were meeting minutes from something called the Black Hollow Resistance Committee, dated from the early 2000s, talking about defending the homeland and maintaining operational security. One page had a list of names with addresses, and at the bottom someone had recently written in pen, "She's here." My first instinct was to pack everything and leave immediately, but when I went outside, my car wouldn't start. The engine wouldn't even turn over, just clicked when I turned the key. The hood was still locked, no visible damage, but someone had clearly done something to it while I was reading those papers. No cell service meant I couldn't call for help, and walking back to town would take hours through those woods, past those driveways with chains and warnings. I went back inside and started packing anyway, throwing clothes into my bag while trying to think clearly. That's when I heard vehicles approaching, multiple engines growing louder up the dirt road. Through the bedroom window, I watched 3 trucks pull up and park in a semicircle around my dead car. About 8 men got out, all wearing regular clothes but moving in this coordinated way, spreading out to cover different angles of the cabin. One of them was the man from last night, and he was carrying a rifle, not pointing it, just holding it casual across his chest. They didn't storm in or yell demands, they just waited. One man, older than the others with a white beard and sunburned face, walked up to the porch and knocked politely, like he was delivering a package. When I didn't answer, he called out that they needed to talk about my situation and that I'd found property that didn't belong to me. His voice was calm, almost friendly, but the way he said property made it clear he wasn't talking about the cabin. Through the kitchen window, I could see 2 more men positioned near the tree line, watching the back of the house. The bearded man kept talking, explaining that Black Hollow folks took care of their own problems, that they'd protected this place for 20 years from outsiders who wouldn't understand their way of life. He said the owner, Mr. Garrett, should never have rented to strangers, that it was a mistake they now had to correct. He gave me 10 minutes to come out and discuss things like civilized people, then walked back to lean against one of the trucks, checking his watch. I remembered something from those papers, a hand-drawn map showing various locations marked with X's and one marked emergency cache near a creek about a quarter mile behind the cabin. If these people had hidden supplies, maybe there was something I could use, maybe even a radio or flare gun. The bathroom had a small window facing the woods, barely big enough to squeeze through. I turned on the kitchen faucet and the TV to create noise, then locked myself in the bathroom and pried open the window screen. The men out front were focused on the main entrance, and the 2 watching the back were positioned more to the sides. I dropped my bag out first, then pulled myself through, scraping my ribs on the frame. The woods were thick enough that once I got 20 feet from the cabin, I was hidden. Behind me, I could hear the bearded man call out that I had 5 minutes left, his voice still patient, but with an edge now. The creek was exactly where the map indicated, running shallow over moss-covered rocks. I followed it downstream, looking for anything unusual, and found a green metal box partially buried under exposed tree roots. Inside were vacuum-sealed bags containing cash, about $3,000 in small bills, 2 prepaid cell phones still in plastic, car keys, and a loaded handgun I didn't touch. There was also a notebook wrapped in plastic with more names, photos of people at what looked like training exercises, and detailed plans for something called Day Zero. The phones were old, but when I powered one on, it had a single bar of service. I called 911 and told them I was being held against my will by armed men at the Garrett cabin in Black Hollow. The dispatcher went quiet for a long moment, then said they'd send someone, but it would take time, maybe an hour, since they had to call in state police. She told me to stay hidden and keep the line open, but I could hear hesitation in her voice, like she knew exactly what I was talking about and wasn't sure what would happen when help arrived. I heard shouting from the direction of the cabin, then the sound of breaking glass. They'd discovered I was gone. The bearded man's voice carried through the trees, no longer friendly, barking orders to search the perimeter and check the creek. I grabbed the money and one phone, leaving everything else, and moved deeper into the woods, trying to remember which direction led to the main road. Tree branches kept catching my clothes, and every snapped twig sounded like a gunshot. About 15 minutes into moving through the underbrush, I heard dogs barking getting closer. These people knew the land, had dogs, and were organized like they'd done this before. I found a cluster of fallen trees creating a small hollow covered by dead leaves and wedged myself inside, pulling branches over the opening. The barking got louder, maybe 2 or 3 dogs, and I could hear men calling to each other, coordinating their search pattern. One voice passed so close I could hear his breathing, heavy from running, and the static of a walkie-talkie saying they found my tracks heading toward the creek. 40 minutes passed like hours, lying in that hollow, insects crawling across my face, trying not to move or breathe too loud. Then I heard sirens, multiple vehicles, and the dogs suddenly stopped barking. Through the leaves, I glimpsed flashlight beams swinging wildly as the searchers headed back toward the cabin. The state police dispatcher called the phone, asking for my exact location, and when I whispered where I was, she said to stay put, that officers were securing the scene. It took another 20 minutes before a female officer found me, her hand on her weapon, looking as nervous as I felt. She helped me out and walked me to a state police cruiser, past federal-looking vehicles I hadn't heard arrive. The cabin area was flooded with law enforcement, and I saw the bearded man in handcuffs, but most of the trucks were gone, and only 3 other men were detained. The officer told me they'd been watching this group for years, but never had someone willing to come forward, that the cabin was supposed to be off limits, but Garrett rented it out without the others knowing, probably needing money. She said I was lucky I called when I did. They drove me to a motel 2 counties over and had me give statements for 3 days. The FBI showed me photos of weapons caches they found, training sites, and plans for attacks on federal buildings. I never went back for my car or belongings. They said the group had scattered but would reform somewhere else, that groups like this were all over these mountains, waiting. I still have one of those prepaid phones and the money, evidence they said I could keep since it couldn't be traced. Sometimes I check online for news about Black Hollow, but there's never anything. Like the whole thing never happened. I never thought I'd write about what happened last August, but I need to get this out there, because maybe someone can explain what I stumbled into. I was living in Austin at the time, had been there for almost 15 years working as an electrical contractor. Decent life. Nothing spectacular, but comfortable enough. Left my hometown in Kentucky when I was 22, right after my parents died in that car accident on Route 60. And honestly never planned on going back. The place held too many memories. You know how small towns can suffocate you with their weight of history, and everyone knowing your business. That Wednesday started like any other. Coffee, checking work orders, planning to rewire some guy's garage, until my phone rang around noon with a number I didn't recognize, area code from back home. The voice on the other end was raspy, like someone who'd been smoking for decades. And they knew my full name, middle name included, which immediately set off alarm bells in my head. They said they'd been trying to find me for months, that there was something in my parents' old house I needed to see, something about answers to questions I didn't even know I had. When I asked who they were, the line went quiet for maybe 10 seconds before they said, "Someone who knew your father better than you think," and hung up. I tried calling back, but the number was dead. Like it never existed. Spent the rest of that day distracted. Couldn't focus on work. Kept thinking about that voice and what could possibly be waiting in a house that had been empty for 15 years. By evening, I'd packed a bag and was on the road, telling myself I was just going to drive by, maybe peek through the windows. Nothing more. The drive took me through the night and into the next morning. 18 hours of highways gradually narrowing into those winding mountain roads I used to know like the back of my hand. The closer I got, the more wrong everything felt. Not scary exactly, just like driving into an old photograph where the colors had started to fade. When I finally hit the town limits around 10 in the morning, the first thing I noticed was how empty everything was. Not abandoned like a ghost town in the movies, but more like everyone had just stepped out for a minute and never came back. Cars still parked in driveways but covered in pollen and leaves, mailboxes stuffed so full that envelopes were scattered on the ground below them. The grocery store where Mrs. Coleman used to give me free candy was still there, lights on inside, but when I walked up to the glass doors, I could see rows of expired products on the shelves and a thick layer of dust on everything. I drove through what used to be downtown, past the barber shop where my dad got his hair cut every 3rd Saturday, past the church where half the town showed up every Sunday, and maybe saw 3 people total. An old woman sweeping her porch who went inside the second she saw my truck, a guy in overalls who literally turned and walked the other direction when I waved, and someone watching me from behind curtains in a 2nd-story window. I could see their silhouette, but they backed away when they realized I'd spotted them. The weird part was that some houses looked lived in. Fresh paint, mowed lawns, flowers in the window boxes, while others right next door were clearly abandoned with broken windows and yards gone wild. There was no pattern to it, like someone had randomly decided which houses to maintain and which to let rot. The silence was the worst part, though. No dogs barking, no lawnmowers running, no kids playing, just this heavy quiet that made my ears ring. My parents' house sat at the end of Sycamore Drive, a white two-story with green shutters that I'd helped my dad paint the summer before I left. From the street, it looked exactly the same, like I could walk in and find my mom making her famous pot roast while Dad watched the game in his recliner. The lawn was perfect, not a blade out of place. The flower beds my mother loved still blooming with those purple petunias she ordered from some catalog every spring. Even the mailbox had been repainted recently, our last name Caldwell still stenciled on the side in that fancy script my mom picked out. But when I got closer, I noticed things that didn't add up. The doormat was new, one of those modern rubber ones, not the woven welcome mat my mom had for 20 years. And there were security cameras mounted under the eaves, small black domes that definitely weren't there when this was home. The front door was unlocked, which should have been my first red flag to leave, but I was already too deep into this to turn back. The inside hit me with this smell of vanilla air freshener trying to cover something else, something chemical and sharp like a hospital corridor. All our old furniture was gone, replaced with metal filing cabinets lining the walls of what used to be our living room, each one labeled with years ranging from 1985 to 2018. The dining room table where we ate Sunday dinners was now covered in manila folders spread out like someone had been sorting through them recently. I could see rings from coffee cups still wet on some of the papers. But what really made me stop breathing for a second was the wall of photographs in the hallway. Dozens of them, all children between maybe 6 and 12 years old. School photos mostly, some candids at playgrounds or birthday parties. And I recognized at least half of them. Kids from town, kids I went to school with, kids who supposedly moved away with their families over the years. Under each photo was a label with a name, a date, and a case number written in neat handwriting. Tommy Brennan was up there, disappeared in 1987 according to the label, but I remembered his parents telling everyone they'd moved to Florida for his dad's new job. Lisa Garrett, 1991. Her family supposedly went to live with relatives in Texas after their farm went under. Kevin Walsh, 1994. His mom said they were starting fresh in Oregon after the divorce. All these kids whose families just vanished overnight, and we all just accepted it because that's what happens in small towns. People leave for better opportunities, right? The dates went all the way up to 2018. Kids I didn't recognize, must have been born after I left town. I pulled out my phone to take pictures but had no signal, not even emergency calls, which was impossible because I'd had 3 bars when I parked outside. Started opening the folders on the dining table and found police reports that were never filed, witness statements that were never taken, medical examiner notes about remains found in various locations around the county, all stamped with "Investigation Suspended" in red ink. My dad's name was all over these documents, not as an investigator but as someone who'd been filing complaints, demanding investigations, writing letter after letter to state police, FBI, anyone who would listen. The dates started about 2 years before he died. Hundreds of pages of his handwriting documenting suspicious disappearances, noting patterns, begging for help. One letter dated a week before the accident said, "They're not just taking them anymore. They're replacing families, bringing in people who look enough like them that nobody asks questions. Check the dental records, check the birth certificates. These aren't the same people." There were responses too. Official letterhead telling him to stop wasting resources, threatening legal action if he continued his harassment, and one final notice dated the day before my parents died that said, "Your concerns have been noted and no further action will be taken. Consider this matter closed." I was reading through his notes about how certain town officials seemed to know when kids would disappear when I heard footsteps on the porch. 3 people walked in without knocking. 2 men in their 50s and a younger woman, all wearing regular clothes but moving like cops. That careful way of keeping their hands visible but ready. The older guy, gray beard and work boots, looked familiar, but I couldn't place him until he smiled. And I saw he was missing the same front tooth as Sheriff Coleman, who used to run the town back when I was a kid. Except Sheriff Coleman would be 90 by now if he was still alive, and this guy looked exactly like he did 20 years ago. The woman had a clipboard and started checking things off while the other man, tall with a scar across his neck, stood by the door like he was blocking it. "You got the call then," the Coleman lookalike said. Not a question, but a statement. "We've been maintaining your father's work, keeping the records safe, waiting for someone from the family to come back. The others said you wouldn't, but I knew you would. You're just like him, can't leave well enough alone." The woman looked up from her clipboard and spoke in this flat voice like she was reading a weather report. "Population management protocol has been in effect since 1985. Selected youth are relocated for processing, while family units are replaced with compliant alternatives to maintain social stability. Your father's interference resulted in termination, but his documentation was preserved as per regulations. You've now been briefed and have two options: integration or relocation." The tall man by the door pulled out a folder from inside his jacket, opened it to show a photo of me taken that morning at the grocery store, already added to their collection with a case number and everything. The Coleman lookalike kept talking while I tried to process what I was hearing. "We tried to keep you away, let you live your life in Austin, but someone made that phone call against protocol. Now you're here, you've seen the files, and decisions have to be made. The town needs people who understand the situation, who can help maintain things. Your house is still here, we've kept it ready, you could slide right back in like you never left." I asked them what happened to the kids, where they actually went, and the woman tilted her head like I'd asked something strange. "Processing centers in multiple states. Some integrate into new communities under different identities, others serve different purposes based on aptitude testing. The program has a 94% success rate for social reintegration. Your hometown serves as one of 12 collection points in this region." She pulled out a contract from her clipboard, placed it on the table next to my father's letters. "Sign this, accept your role as a record keeper like your father should have. And you can even continue his documentation work, officially this time. Refuse and you become a relocation case yourself. The choice is yours, but it needs to be made now." The tall man moved away from the door, pulled out a chair for me to sit, and I realized they were completely serious. This wasn't some elaborate prank or delusion. This was real and happening, and had been happening for decades while everyone just looked the other way or got replaced when they asked too many questions. I signed the papers. What else could I do? They had my photo in their files, knew where I lived in Austin, had been watching me for who knows how long. The Coleman lookalike patted my shoulder like we were old friends, and told me I'd made the smart choice, that my father would have been proud I chose to survive rather than fight a system bigger than any of us. They gave me a set of keys, told me someone would come by every month to collect new documentation and bring supplies, and that my job was simple: maintain the records, keep the house ready for viewing when necessary, and never speak about this to anyone outside the network. They left me there with boxes of files dating back 40 years, hundreds of missing children who were never really missing, just redistributed like resources in some massive program I still don't fully understand. I drove back to Austin that night, quit my job over the phone, and returned to that house permanently 2 weeks later. That was 3 months ago, and I've been maintaining the records ever since, adding new photos to the wall when they arrive in unmarked envelopes, filing reports I know no one will ever investigate. The reason I'm writing this now, posting it here where maybe someone will see it, is because yesterday I got a new envelope with photos of 3 kids from a town in Ohio I've never heard of, and one of them looks exactly like my nephew, my sister's kid who lives in Seattle, except the date on the photo is from next month. I called my sister last night and she said they're planning a family road trip through the Midwest in 2 weeks, mentioned they might stop in some small towns along the way to see real America. I tried to warn her, told her to stay on the highways, skip the small towns, but she just laughed and said I was being paranoid. I can't leave this house, they track my phone, my car, probably reading this right now as I type it, but maybe someone out there will understand what I'm trying to say. If your kids' friends suddenly move away without saying goodbye, if families in your town disappear overnight and nobody seems concerned, if you notice people who look familiar but something about them is just wrong, don't investigate, don't ask questions, just leave. Pack up and get out before you get a phone call asking you to come home, before you find yourself sitting where I am, organizing files for children who'll never be seen again, becoming part of a machine that's been running longer than any of us realized and will keep running long after we're gone. When I signed the papers for the house on Willow Creek Lane, I told myself it was the kind of place where a second chance could finally take root. 2 stories, pale siding chipped in a way that gave it character, and a narrow porch that creaked every time I shifted my weight. The price was shockingly low, which I chalked up to the market and the fact that small towns rarely attracted newcomers. After the divorce, I needed a place that felt like mine, quiet, detached from the life I had just left behind. From the outside, the house looked tired but harmless, like it had been waiting for someone who might care enough to settle in again. My first week was spent trying to make it feel lived in. I painted the kitchen a soft green, unpacked boxes at night while the radio hummed, and left the windows open to let the smell of fresh air replace the scent of dust. Neighbors passed by, some nodding politely, others keeping their gaze locked on the sidewalk. I assumed it was just the small town way of treating strangers. Still, the silence had an edge to it, as if people were holding back words they didn't want to share. No one lingered long when I tried to strike up a conversation about the weather or the best place to get groceries. One afternoon, while sipping coffee at the only cafe in town, I mentioned the address to the barista, just in passing, the way people do when they're hoping for a bit of local advice about plumbing or lawn care. Her expression faltered for the briefest second, and she fumbled with the lid she was screwing onto my cup. "Willow Creek," she repeated, almost under her breath. Then she forced a smile too quick and said, "Hope it works out for you," before moving on to the next customer. It was a small moment, but it stuck with me like a splinter. Curiosity got the better of me. A few days later, I drove to the town clerk's office, which was tucked inside a brick building that smelled faintly of mildew and old books. I asked if I could see the property records for my address, pretending it was about taxes. The clerk, a woman with gray hair pinned into a severe bun, gave me a long look before sliding the files across the counter. Page after page detailed previous owners, always women, and next to each name were abrupt endings. Missing, relocated suddenly, domestic disturbance. It wasn't the kind of neat turnover you'd expect for a modest family home. Reading it felt like pulling back wallpaper, only to discover mold creeping across every inch beneath. Driving back that evening, the streets of Willow Creek felt narrower than usual, as if the houses leaned in to watch me pass. At home, I sat at the kitchen table with the documents spread in front of me. Each woman's name carried the weight of a story cut short. One had disappeared after only 6 months. Another left suddenly, her belongings still listed in the inventory as unclaimed. And then there was a note about a police call, unresolved disturbance, but no follow-up details. It wasn't just unsettling. It felt like the house itself had a history it was unwilling to release in full. That night, while brushing my teeth upstairs, I heard a soft scrape beneath the floorboards in the hallway. At first, I thought it might be the old house settling, but the noise repeated, slow and deliberate, as though someone were dragging a piece of furniture across bare wood. I stepped into the hallway, toothbrush still in hand, and the sound stopped instantly. The silence afterward was sharp, almost staged, like whoever or whatever had been making it wanted me to know I was being listened to. The following morning, I checked the crawl space in the basement, shining a flashlight into corners heavy with cobwebs. Nothing. No signs of rodents, no shifted boards, no evidence of anything that could have caused that dragging sound. I told myself exhaustion was twisting ordinary noises into something more sinister. Still, when I stood at the kitchen sink later that day, I kept catching my reflection in the window. The odd part was, I could swear the reflection wasn't perfectly in sync. My hand would move a beat faster than the image, or the tilt of my head lingered in the glass when I'd already straightened. Later in the week, I mentioned the house again to a woman stocking shelves at the grocery store. She was maybe in her late 50s, with short hair dyed a stubborn red. Her eyes softened when she heard the address, but instead of answering, she quietly shook her head and muttered, "You should have asked before buying." She didn't elaborate, and I didn't press her. The way her face tightened around the words told me she'd already said more than she meant to. Walking back to my car, the grocery bags rustling in my hands, I had the strong impression that the house wasn't just avoided, it was actively feared. By the second week, sleep came in short bursts. I'd wake to the sound of faint footsteps pacing across the upstairs landing, always stopping right outside my bedroom door. Each time I'd sit up, heart hammering, whispering into the darkness just to prove I still had a voice. Nothing answered, but the air in the room always felt heavier afterward, as if someone had been standing on the other side of the wood, deciding whether to enter. One night, I finally worked up the courage to press my ear against the door when the steps began. The boards creaked softly, slow and measured, and then silence. I waited, holding my breath until I heard the faintest whisper. Not words, not even a tone I could place. Just the sound of someone breathing steadily, inches away, separated from me only by a thin panel of wood. I slammed my fist against the door and the breathing stopped, followed by retreating steps that melted into nothing. The next morning, I packed a bag and went back to the clerk's office. I asked directly if anything had ever been found, any trace of the women listed in those files. The clerk didn't answer right away. Instead, she slid the folder back across the counter and murmured, "You'll leave soon, too. Everyone does." Her voice wasn't cruel, but it carried the weight of certainty, like she'd seen the pattern enough times not to doubt it. That evening, I called a realtor and put the house back on the market. I left most of my belongings behind. Even now, I can't explain why walking away felt less like running and more like survival. I've rented apartments since, nothing permanent, but safe enough to sleep through the night. Sometimes when I hear footsteps in the hallway of a new place, I still expect them to stop right outside my door. And every time I wonder if the house on Willow Creek is still waiting for another woman to sign her name on the deed. I'd just come out of a messy breakup that left me feeling like I had no ground beneath me. My apartment felt hollow, my routine stale, and every corner of the city carried some trace of her. Her favorite coffee shop, the bookstore we used to wander, even the damn laundromat. When a rental listing popped up online for a little place in a town I'd never heard of tucked away in New England, it felt like a lifeline. The ad promised quiet streets, welcoming neighbors, and a library that looked like something out of an old postcard. I didn't even think twice. I packed what I had left and signed the lease. The town was called Whispering Pines, and from the moment I drove in, I noticed how neat everything looked, like it had been arranged for a magazine cover. White porches with rocking chairs, picket fences painted freshly, every mailbox with names carefully stenciled. People waved to me as if I had lived there all my life, and for a second it was comforting. After weeks of chaos, the rehearsed politeness was a shock to my system. They asked where I came from, but when I answered, they never seemed interested in the details. Just smiled and nodded like they already knew more than I was saying. At first, I chalked up the strangeness to small-town quirks, the kind of surface charm you expect when everyone knows each other's grandparents. But after a few days, I started noticing something that didn't sit right. There was no movement, literally none. No moving trucks, no for sale signs, no kids talking about college plans. The local diner had the same crowd every morning, and even though people welcomed me warmly, their conversations carried this subtle undertone that made me feel less like a neighbor and more like a guest at a party I couldn't leave. The library became my refuge. It smelled like dust and lemon polish, its shelves crowded with titles that seemed decades old. The upstairs section was quieter, almost too quiet, with these long oak tables where the sunlight fell in dusty streaks. One afternoon, while pulling a book on regional history, I noticed something wedged between the stacks. Thin, leather-bound journals with dates smudged on the covers. They didn't look like they belonged to the library. The handwriting inside was uneven, shaky, like someone desperate to get their words out before they were cut short. And the names, they weren't locals. They were outsiders, people like me, writing about how they came here and how something was wrong. The first journal I read was from someone named Emily Kerr. She wrote about moving into Whispering Pines after a divorce, about how the townspeople treated her with endless kindness, until she realized no one ever left. Her entries grew more frantic, the last one barely legible. They smile, but they're waiting. I hear them outside at night. The hairs on my neck rose as I flipped through. There were other journals too, dozens, each one from someone different, all describing the same slow realization. The town didn't just welcome you, it consumed you. I carried one of the journals home hidden under my jacket and read it late into the night. My lamp flickered as if the bulb was about to burn out, and I kept glancing toward the curtains, convinced someone was out there. The writer mentioned being invited to endless community events, potlucks, church services, book clubs, and how refusing wasn't an option. The entries described a sense of being monitored, every step noticed. The scariest part wasn't the paranoia, it was how normal everyone acted while the person writing was unraveling. After that night, I started paying closer attention. Mrs. Larkin, my landlord, always showed up unannounced with baskets of bread or pies, her eyes never blinking enough, like she was waiting for me to slip. The man who ran the gas station asked me the same questions every time, word for word, like he was reading from a script. I'd walk down the street and feel heads turn toward me, then quickly away when I caught them. The town had this way of smothering you with kindness that felt less like generosity and more like a net tightening. One afternoon, I went back to the library and found the section where I had discovered the journals sealed off with a staff-only sign that hadn't been there before. The librarian, a tall man with graying hair, noticed me lingering and gave me this long stare that made my throat dry up. His voice was calm when he finally spoke. "You found enough to settle in. Best to stop digging." It didn't sound like advice, it sounded like a warning. That night I decided to test something. I packed a small duffel bag, nothing that would scream, "I'm leaving for good," just a change of clothes and some cash. Around midnight, I got in my car and started driving toward the highway. The streets were too quiet. No porch lights, no crickets, just silence pressing against the windows. When I reached the town's exit sign, there were cones blocking the road, and beyond them, 2 trucks parked sideways, headlights pointed right at me. I didn't see drivers, but I felt eyes on me all the same. I turned around before anyone had to say a word. The next morning, people acted like nothing had happened. Mrs. Larkin waved from her porch with another basket of bread. The gas station man repeated his lines like clockwork. It was as if the night before hadn't existed, like the town was daring me to mention it. I didn't. Instead, I went back to the library and slipped the journal I'd borrowed under my jacket again, clutching it like proof I wasn't imagining everything. I stayed in Whispering Pines for 3 more weeks, each day heavier than the last. Invitations kept coming, neighbors knocking at my door, all smiles, all insistence. I stopped sleeping properly, jumped at every sound. One evening I noticed the journal was gone from my nightstand. In its place was a handwritten note on thick paper. "You belong here now. Don't make this harder." That was when I knew I couldn't wait any longer. 2 days later, I left before dawn, abandoning most of my belongings. I drove straight through until the gas tank was nearly dry, only stopping when I crossed into a different state. I never went back for my things, never checked if anyone rented my old place. To this day, I don't know how Whispering Pines manages to keep people there, or why they need outsiders so badly. All I know is that I escaped, and I never talk about that town in person. Writing it here feels dangerous enough.